Ancient Greek apocalypso literally means a time of great revealing, a great uncovering, a lifting of the veil, literally. And this is where we begin lifting the veil. Just a reminder, guys, that this channel is funded entirely by my own audience, and some of the graphic visuals that I've been doing have been about 3 years in the making, and this film itself has been well over the past couple months of non-stop editing and production. And so please consider contributing to help support the massive amount of effort that goes into making all the visuals and the graphics and the animations that are required for these presentations. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a quick brief overview heads up of the direction that this video took. Was it originally started out as a response video, sort of nothing too serious. It ended up, as always, my rebuttal ended up being just, I didn't expect this, I didn't plan this, but it ended up going, if I opened up the can of worms, I really had to go there. So that's what I ended up doing, and it ended up being like a full, very visual and very comprehensive and complex animated, basically a film that I wasn't expecting. So basically the narration is not matching the quality of the information within it. So I normally, for a video like this, I would have put on a suit and tie, to show off my intellectual prowess to you. But obviously, as you can see, I didn't do that. I basically, I just came in from outside to make a quick response video, and so I wasn't wearing a shirt. I had been sitting outside. I'd been working out earlier that day, so I was not planning on this to be anything serious, but it turned out to be a really profound video. So stick with me. You can skip through the intro. I have to give it because I have to give you guys context for what's going on. Otherwise, you won't understand like the purpose of why I'm making this video. So I have to give you some context. If you want, you can skip that, but I guarantee you, I am not here to waste your time. This information that you will see in this video is literally some of the most profound information you will ever find in your entire life, and it's absolutely going to blow your mind in so many ways. It is going to be absolutely profound. I guarantee you that. You cannot unsee what you're about to see, and what you're about to see is going to forever change the way that you think, and it's going to forever up you to a whole other level that has yet to be reached. So it's not going to waste your time. So if you're pressed on time, then skip ahead to the actual information and let's begin. So don't judge me by what I'm wearing or how I look in this video, because again, I was not planning on it being like this. Hey guys, Cullen Smith here. Welcome back to Lifting the Veil. I'm going to try to blow through this as quick as I can, but I was watching this one video, but there's this one clip, like he starts talking about the Masonic symbolism of Sasha Stone's International Tribunal for Natural Justice and his whole organization with New Earth Nation over there in Bali and all of the stuff that they're doing.
This is another thing that I discussed with Sasha and that I read on some interviews that he gave. Their symbolism, the symbolism they use on the ITNJ and on the Humanidad logos, and even on his art, because he has art on his webpage, it's very Masonic. I mean, you'll catch the Eye of Providence, you'll catch pyramids, you'll catch everything. You'll see it, and even the Taurus that is the symbol of the ITNJ is a mythological symbol for the Greek god Dionysus, which is the god of sex and wine. In Greek mythology. He says that he wants to appropriate those symbols because the bad people has used them for centuries, so he wants to change that energy, absorb them, and basically use them for good. That's a real nice excuse,
That's weird. Okay, and so that's what he said. I remember reading something and where he explained essentially said what you said, that these symbols meant something good in the past and all these bad guys use it for something bad, and so he wants to rectify, he wants to bring life back to him. So now he's using these Luciferian and Masonic symbols for that purpose. That was his explanation.
Apparently.
Is it something that you...
Revolutionary guy.
Now, victims being victimized by those groups, do you buy that as an explanation, or could there be other symbols that would be more beneficial for victims versus pulling up some Luciferian ones? I mean, that's the issue that I would have. Go ahead.
I think there's no need for symbols. I mean, I think there's. I mean,
but let's say you do.
A logo, you can do a design, but
yeah. but let's say you do use a logo. Couldn't you grab something? Couldn't you grab something that doesn't have an imagery for a victim that is negative?
Of course, because those same symbols are triggering for victims. Exactly.
That's my point.
This what you're saying is perfect. Yeah, those symbols can be triggering for some people, and that's the problem. And I don't buy his excuse. I don't think there's coincidences. I don't believe in coincidence.
You don't buy his explanation. I mean, it kind of makes sense in kind of a esoteric way, but I'm like, well, you're hurting people at the same time, so maybe there's a better path. Okay, so now you also...
Exactly. And
go ahead.
And that's what my channel is dedicated to, is like actually, not being afraid of symbols and signs and occult mythologies and all of that. It's garbage. And so I just want to illuminate what the actual meaning of the Thyrsus and Dionysus and so many other aspects of mythology and symbolism and esoterica that has deep allegorical meaning that the Freemasons and nobody else is going to corrupt, and the alt-right or this alternative media. None of these people are going to get any of this stuff correct, and so I just want to correct what the hell this guy is railing on about here.
And this is why.
So in truth, the Thyrsus is, of course, it's the anise staff. It's the stalk of the anise plant, or the fennel stalk, which is initially it's a very abundant herb, a very potent and powerful healing herb, a tool of ancient esoteric alchemy, and a symbol of the fertility and the fecundity of nature itself, as Dionysus actually is. And of course, the symbolism of Dionysus is actually Jesus. Dionysus is a precursor and an exact epithet of Jesus. Jesus was literally, Jesus Christos was literally modeled after the archetypal mytheme of the slain harvest lord, the slain harvest god of wine and the agricultural season, which is why Jesus turns water into wine at the end of the season, which just as the sunlight grows the golden crops and then is harvested at the end of the season, and where the water that you use to water the water in the grapes then becomes fermented into wine, storing at the end of the season, at the end of the agricultural harvest, which is why Jesus was a farmer. Jesus is with the wheat and the tares and the crops and the harvest, and he's the reaper and the sower, because it's all about the crops of nature, and it's all about the cycles and the seasons that the sun goes through on its path on the hero's journey, or the path of the fool, throughout the annual year, throughout the annual season, throughout the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 houses of the year, which is exactly why it's Jesus and the central sun, the central hub, surrounded by the 12 apostles, the 12 posts of the annual year, the 12 months of the year, the 12 seasons. As Jesus goes through each of these houses, the sun goes through each of these houses and represents the archetype of the hero's journey, of the cycle of nature itself. So of course that's what Dionysus is, literally just a snapshot in time, just a singular archetype of this overarching mytheme of nature itself.
And so this is of course why all of these slain harvest lords, these slain archetypal agricultural harvest lords, which is exactly why literally comes from its predecessor as Osiris, who is also the agricultural grain fertility harvest lord, is a fertility harvest lord, just as in the Bible it says Jesus was also the Lord of the harvest, which comes from Dionysus, which comes from Osiris, who was also the agricultural fertility harvest lord of the season, who all of these slain lords, they all went to the underworld at the end of the season where they were all slain, and then they died, and then they were resurrected, because it's all the ancient story of the sun and astrotheology, the cycle of the light of the world, the Son of God, which is why Osiris is literally the same exact depiction as the Fool of the Tarot, which comes from Osiris, because it's the path of the Fool, the path of the sun, which is the hero's journey.
journey throughout the annual season, the annual archetypal year, which is why Osiris goes into the tomb and why the staff of Osiris is literally where the thyrsus comes from. It comes from the pine cone staff of Osiris, which is the caduceus staff of the human anatomy of the spinal column, which is exactly this pineal gland sits at the center of the cycle, which is literally the 0 point of the skull, which is literally the central sun of consciousness inside your head, which is literally represented by the pine cone. And this is why the pineal gland is surrounded by its 12 disciples, in other words, which are the 12 cranial nerves. And so this is literally why we have Jesus depicted, who sits directly at the top of the tree of life, of the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is this human central nervous and spinal system, the spinous system. And so that's why it's depicting the caduceus standing harmonic wave of the tree itself, the tree trunk itself, which is the axis mundi. Again, Christ sits atop the axis mundi, and that's why he's obviously surrounded by the central nervous system of the 12 cranial nerves. Oh yeah, and this reminds me again of back what we covered in Symbols of Power Part 2, or was it Part 3? I can't remember. But was the etymology of the pineal gland itself, the epiphysis cerebri, the epiphysis cerebri, which I like to pronounce the epiphysis cerebri, because the epiphysis, the epiphysis of the pineal gland is literally where the epiphany occurs. The epiphany is the realization, the self-realization, the apex, the pinnacle, the capstone, the absolute, the most high, the culmination of the experience, the illumination experience, the top, the utmost, the pinnacle. But so that's where you have the epiphany, the light bulb goes off, or goes on, should I say. And so that's the epiphany of the epiphysis cerebri, is the pineal gland is. And so of course this is where we get the epiphany of Christ. As an epiphany literally comes from Greek, meaning to reveal, which is literally, it's a revelation. It's the divine inspiration, the revelation. It's the rapture. It's the epiphany. It's the samadhi, which is of course why the Epiphany of Christ is the Christian feast during Christmas season that celebrates the revelation of God incarnate as Jesus Christ, which is within you, is that you are the revelation. And I'm speaking allegorically here, I'm not like a fundamentalist Christian perspective, but this is the underlying truth, the underlying actual science, the physical anatomy, the physiology behind all of these religions, and especially behind the scriptures. This is what it all means, what it's all pointing to. And it's multiple layers deep, but it begins with the physical human anatomy, and then it extends outwardly into the actual cosmos and the astronomical sense as well. And that's why I refer to this science as astrophysiology. And I also refer to this directly as what I call metaphysiology, which is beyond just physical structure of the body and into the actual above and beyond what forms and what gives meaning to the human body and what gives structure and purpose and all of that to it. Greek epiphany literally comes from the prefix of epi, meaning above or on to, above, beyond as well, and plus phanein, meaning to show, from Proto-Indo-European ba, meaning to shine. And so this is why Greek feign, this is the verb phanein, meaning to show, but the Greek root feign means to shine. It literally means light. It means fire, light, shine, bright, which again from Proto-Indo-European baha, meaning to shine. And so, of course, this is why the epiphanes is literally the revelation by the shining of the light. The illumination is what it is literally all about. A divine manifestation or a revelation, an illumination experience. Okay, and so this is... I've connected this to what it actually means here, and this is actually what the symbolism that they're showing in this Sumerian relief, and I'm not sure exactly which clay tablet or which relief this one is of, but it's a well-known, one of the most popular and one of the most iconic images known from Sumero-Akkadian Babylonian religions of their depiction of their tree of life, which is actually a pomegranate tree. And this depiction is actually the pomegranates surrounding the one, just as this medieval Christian artwork is also depicting the 12 around the one, just as the pomegranate here is the exact same symbolism.
originally of the tree of life and the human body, or the axis mundi, directly flanked by the two twin pillars, which are disguised or depicted here as these two men standing. And what they're doing is they're actually, see, everyone's always, what's with the baskets, what's with the handbags, what's in the basket? But what they're actually doing is they're harvesting the fruit of the tree of life. They're harvesting the pomegranate, and in other depictions they're harvesting the pineal. They're harvesting the pine cone from the pine tree. The pine tree is the human body, the world pillar. And so this is exactly what this old relief is actually depicting, and that's why they have Shamash, or the sun god, which became Ahura Mazda, or which was Ashur. Basically the sky, the sun, the solar ascended deity, which is the same depiction as the Caduceus staff with the wings of the crown, the winged crown atop the crown of illumination. So again, that's why the 12 around the one it's all the exact same story, and it's all the exact same symbolism. So that's what the handbags are for. They're picking the fruit of the tree of life. They're collecting the fruits of the labor, the fruits of the tree of life. They're harvesting the fruits of the illumination. You see the gift of the rays of the sun, of the illumination, the life force, the cosmic energy, which gives life to the physical body, and which bears the fruit of illumination, which we then harvest and we partake of here in this earthly realm, on this world. And so it's depicted in Christian, Sumerian, and of course depicting all originating from the anatomy, the source, corresponding to the universal, the cosmic source.
And so, of course, the symbol of the thyrsus, the anise staff, or the anise stalk, topped by the pine cone, of course, it's simply the symbolism of the esoteric human anatomy, the symbolism of ascension of consciousness, of life and physiology itself, as we've covered thoroughly and extremely in depth in the Symbols of Power film series. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're new to my channel, if you're new to this information, I will link those videos at the end of this video and in the description down below as well. So make sure to click on that up here in the corner to check out that information so much more in depth, because I'm not going to go in depth on that here. But I haven't specifically covered the thyrsus and the pine cone too much in depth. We covered it in Symbols of Power Part 2. We covered the axis mundi, which is what the anise staff is, what the thyrsus is. It's the axis mundi. It is the world pillar, the world mountain, the world axis, the stalk or the pillar of life, the pillar of stability, and all of that. So it is literally, it's representative of the human spinal column, of the Shishumna in astrotheology.
And the torsus comes from ancient Greek, literally torsos, which is actually the doublet of torso, which literally became the word torsos, is literally where we get the word torsus from, torsos. And again, is obviously topped with the conical ornament, and any conical ornament, and we will cover this later on in the film as to why the conical ornament shape is so significant, carried by Bacchus or his followers, or Dionysus. And in botany, it's a species of inflorescence, which has a very dense panicle. And I want to interject here real quick while I'm on this subject, is that back when I used to grow cannabis in California, I had noticed the sacred geometry of what creates the cannabis buds. When I specifically found this one bud that I noticed, and it was, I wish I'd taken a picture of it, and I didn't end up posting it anywhere, and I should have, but I just got too busy. But anyways, what I posted a picture of, or what I took a picture of, was looking head on one of the cannabis buds that I had, and what created the form was actually a perfect pentagonal vortex. So if you take a pentagram, a five-pointed star, and you spin it, that's literally what creates the cannabis buds, at least the OG Kush that we were growing. So I just wanted to point that out. So the entire numerology, the entire mathematics of the cannabis plant is, the leaves go from 3 leaves. They start off at 3 when the plant is young, and then it matures to a 5 leaf And then it matures. When it's fully mature, it becomes a 7 leaf. So 3, 5, 7. And then, of course, the bud itself is also a Venusian, or the energy signature pattern of Venus, which is the pentagonal 5-pointed spiral, which is the influence of Venus, which creates many plants and herbs on planet Earth have that energy signature of the planet Venus from her magnetic resonance, forming their buds and their fruits and their. So it's found all throughout botany and biology, which is the dense conical shape on the top of the stalk. And of course, inflorescence literally means I begin to flower, which in other words, to blossom. And of course, this is phonetically identical to inflorescence, which literally means in the bright light. Inflorescence in physics literally means the emission of light or other electromagnetic radiation, also meaning the light so emitted. Coined by physicist George Stokes from fluorspar essence. And fluorspar literally means a mineral crystal, a halide or a salt mineral composed of calcium fluoride, the essence of the mineral crystal, which is why the fluoride is what competes with calcium fluoride and what calcifies the crystal of the pineal gland. And so now you'll finally understand why the bird gods, Enki and Enlil, the sky gods, the sky lords, the bird deities are harvest. And if we want to get fringe and conspiracy type thinking, then I could suggest that this is the harvesting of potential. And of course, this is why Jim Henson depicts in the Dark Crystal series as to why the bird overlords, the bird gods, are harvesting the potential of the dark crystal, which is an allegory for the pineal gland, as well as the allegory for the crystal of the human body, of the Kabbalistic tree of life. So harvesting the energy of the human crystal, of the human soul, of the human psyche.
So they may replenish themselves. Cheat death by harnessing the power of their treasure, their prize, their prisoner, the dark crystal.
Throb. At its center, the crystal of truth, the source of all life. The Skeksis have corrupted it. And now our world is at risk from the darkening.
What is the darkening?
Behold.
Something. A vision.
You read too many stories.
No, this was real!
Everything the Skeksis ever told us was a lie. And now everyone and everything is at risk. Join me! So we may finally unite as one against our true foe, the Skeksis.
We are eternal!
A resistance is forming.
Are you sure about this? No.
But I have hope.
Fragile. Precious. Hope catches the light, splitting the darkness, revealing your destiny.
I don't think
think anything will ever be like it was again?
No. It will be better.
And inflorescence literally comes from Latin flos, meaning flower, which gave us floreo, which with the meanings of I bloom, blossom, flower, I flourish, I prosper, I abound with, I am filled with, I am colorful, bright, of wine, meaning I froth. Hence the wine. And the final meaning of medieval Latin poetic sense, I ejaculate, I orgasm. Which is why the very reason why the flow, the etymology and the symbolism of the phlos, the flower, the floreo, is literally the meaning of flowing forth or frothing forth of wine, as well as the fertility, because to be in the flow is is where the root of flourish, because to be in the flow of the phlos, of the flower, is to flourish with fertility and fecundity, and to froth with the ejaculate and orgasm. And so this is exactly why in the ancient times the ancient spermognostics referred to the Holy Communion as the sacred sperma communion once again. It is the drinking of the elixir of life, the consumption of the sacred semen, which provided immortality, the elixir of living waters, the elixir of immortality. And we can't even get into that. This is subjects for whole entire other presentations. So we'll get into that with the Occult Secrets of Blessing presentation and so many others, as well as the Occult Secrets of Oreo. So we'll get into that later on. And this root of the flow ride is now why you understand why you're a flow rider.
Walk without rhythm, and we won't attract the worm.
Recall 1,000 lawyers buried up to their neck in sand. What? No sand?
The sand snakes are with me. He told me he smuggled Jaime Lannister into Dorje.
Who's that?
Jaime fucking Lannister.
Only one God can save us, but not without his eye.
Uncle Jamie?
That's a storm.
Sets hunters right in the patches.
We should run!
Run?
We mortals do it all the time!
Ages have passed since the gods walked among us.
Get off the snake with a swarm of motor! Get off the snake under the collar!
Sugar, do we have one sign?
Close your eyes. See the snake.
Moses. Oh!
Kiss this here.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
But to kiss it without fear, it'll take us through the garden.
Is it a dream where you see yourself standing in sort of sun god robes on a pyramid with 1,000 naked women?
Ride the snake.
We have one sign the likes of which even God has never seen.
Then you shouldn't be afraid to ride.
Ride the snake.
Hello and welcome to the
big ugly eye and I hate it.
One God can save us, but not without his eye.
Through the all-seeing eye.
Snake eyes!
You got snake eyes!
Hey, a snakeskin jacket! I found it! Him! That!
It's a third-degree master mason of the Blue Line.
Hey!
And you ride the flow of the flower of life that emits the phase conjugate electromagnetic radiation of the vortex mechanics of the inner crystal of the pineal gland of the capstone. And you ride the flow to infinity and beyond, in the fluorescence, in the light, which is the enlightenment sitting in the enlightenment of the conical pinnacle. Probably the largest ever turbans were worn by high-ranking Turks of the Ottoman Empire, including soldiers, but these were enormous round turbans wrapped around a hollow cone or a framework that often projected at the top, which was wrapped around the cone, the sacred cone of the vortex plasma electromagnetic physics of the forces of nature itself. Hence they were called sarik, meaning wrapped. Suleiman the Magnificent was renowned for the size of his massive Ottoman turban, also worn by Russian czars and sultans. Turban is literally a turbine, or a turban, from Latin turbinum, which literally means circular movement, top, reel, or a spindle, referring to the torsion of the spin of the turbine, which is a turbo. So perhaps now you finally understand why the agave is literally called the turbinado sugar, why the agave root is literally the exact vortexial conical phi golden mean ratio harmonic vortex of the sacred golden egg. As we covered back in Symbols of Power Part 3, now you understand why it's the torsion, the turbine, the turbo of the turbinado torsion sugar. And we will cover this towards the very end of the film as well, and we will go much deeper into the actual mathematics of why this symbol is so important, is because it is literally the torsos, which is literally the vortex mathematics, the spiral stalk of the human torso, which torso in itself literally comes from an anagram of Taurus, and which itself is just from the root word of torsion, because the torso is what allows us to twist, and it is the element of twisting, which is where we get the word torque from, which is the root word of the Taurus, which is the root word of torsion, because it's everything is made up of electromagnetic torsion fields. All right, so I want to provide a narration for this piece that I've written about the torus and the torso, and what I've noticed and discovered here is that literally the rib cage, if viewed from the correct angle, you can literally view the magnetic lines of force, the electric lines of force in the human torso, in the rib cage itself, which, as we're seeing here, is lined up with the Abha torus of Randy Powell and Marco Rodin's work with the vortex-based mathematics and their toroidal dynamics. And notice how I've directly corresponded and correctly aligned the entire human physiology with the angular shear of each segment of the toroidal dynamic, of each wind of the electric lines of force. And notice how I've correlated them exactly with the spacing between the human rib cage, which directly corresponds. And notice how the flux lines of the torus directly create this sort of effect where it literally acts as an uplifting effect up the vertebrae of the spine, how it directly correlates with the exact morphology and the geometry of the human spine, basically with that lines of magnetic flux basically creating an uplifting or a negation of gravity, which is a counterbalance. It's a counter-rotating current which creates a counterbalance, a perfect 0-point balance between levity and gravity. So in other words, you are literally at the 0 point. You are literally hovering within that stillness of the magnetism of the human torso. And that's exactly the position and the function of the human heart, lying at the exact 0 point between the exact balance, the exact 0 point between levity and gravity.
And of course, levity actually shares linguistic roots with lev, elevate, alleviate, meaning to lighten, to lessen the pain, literally etymologically linked to light. And we will get so much deeper in this in a totally separate presentation of its own. But it's the as opposed to its polarity of gravity, which is literally comes from the root of grave, and graven, which literally means associated with death or darkness, downward, the decline of the underworld, the graven, the gravity, the downward force of physics, whereas the levity is the elevating, the uplifting, the alleviation, the lightening and the lessening of pain and suffering, and elevation, to get lifted. You know, to basically to substantiate my case, is that we can notice that I've aligned the angular shear, and I've tried to the best of my ability. Of course, it's not perfect, but I mean, I tried to align the magnetic lines of force to every point of reference that I possibly could. And you can see I didn't obviously make the circumference of the torus, you know, the exactly corresponding to the circumference of the torso here, but I did in this other slide, which I'll show you here in a second. But so for this one, you can see my lines of force have roughly, in some way, shape, and form, they have come to correspond with the rib, with each rib and in the rib cage, and so I've roughly corresponded it. But of course, the diameter is off. So my torus is a lot wider than the diameter of the torso. And so it's obviously not going to match perfectly, but I have matched that perfectly, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But so I've roughly correlated here, but I've got it larger for a specific reason. It's because these same magnetic lines of force, they come down, and they literally, it's what creates the angular structure of the vertebrae of the spine, which have that unique, basically an X mark pattern, which is literally that 0 point between the forces of levity and the forces of gravity. Gravity, or the levity, being the uplifting, in other words, that upward facing shear at the upward point of the diamond, whereas the gravity is the downward pointing diamond, the downward pointing shear, which comprises that downward angular shear. And so notice how our nexus points directly correspond, with each 0 point, the center point of each vertebrae of the spine, roughly as best as I could, but that's exactly, and then how it directly correlates out with the magnetic lines of force up here towards the clavicle and the shoulder region. How I, roughly as best as I could, I tried to get the ribs to directly correlate with the lines of magnetic force of the Taurus field. And so again, these lines, these angles of shear, these diamonds, and between the forces of levity and gravity, and so again, the upward and the downward corresponding to form that sacred diamond, as we'll cover towards the end of the film, is creating that force of basically of upliftment and simultaneous dual forces of equal and opposing opposites of gravity, a downward descending force with a simultaneous upward or levitating counter-rotating force simultaneously, creating this flux field of the diamonds, and how it's exactly correspondent with the vertebrae that literally creates the structure of the human spine and the human rib cage.
And this is why the torso is literally comprised of the vortex mathematics, of the torsion field, magnetic energy, of the phi ratio torsion field, which is literally what the human torso is, the torsion. And of course, the synonym of the torso is also known as a trunk. And of course, this is the trunk of the tree of life. And the tree of knowledge, which is the CNS, the central nervous system, which are the two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of life, which is the tree of knowledge, the central nervous tree, and the tree of life, which is the torso, the torsion, and the cardiovascular system, the cardiovascular tree.
And physiology. So of course the pine cone at the top is obviously representative of the pineal gland, which is azygous, found at the direct midline of the human body, of the shushumna, which is the spinal column, is where we find the pineal gland, sits directly in between the diencephalon, as the diencephalon is literally the means two heads. It literally means pertaining to the head, two-headed, because the diencephalon is literally two heads, where the singular staff divides into two, which is the entire essence of what God and deity actually means. It's the Dios, it's the Dios, it's the Deu, it's the deity, it's the Deu, the two, which means the two, which means division into two, as all of the universal physics and nature itself is a singular origin that operates through a sex division process of polarity and division into two, which come together and they unite and they have sex and they dance and they interplay and they intermingle and the waters mix, and then it recreates and it rejoins and reunites together in the hieroscamos, the holy matrimony, to give birth to the third, to the divine child, the third, the Holy Trinity.
Okay, so this was from one of my a big piece from one of my full presentations that I haven't really done anything with yet or haven't revealed yet. But so again, this big piece was written for an entirely separate context. But Dione is cognate of Dionysus in the sense of Dione plus Isus, and Greek, of course, Jesus in Greek was Isus, which is Jesus, which is Zeus, which is equivalent to the divine feminine and masculine astronomical and astrotheological principles. Again, literally goddess and god, as Jesus was literally Jupiter's Zeus. So he was an amalgamation of Zeus as well, an amalgamation of many of the different astrotheological archetypes, as Jupiter, Zeus, the Jupiterian, the solar aspect, and the Dione is the lunar aspect, again, masculine and feminine, and given the same etymological derivation as the name Zeus, Diana, etc. As Dios literally was she Zeus, as Dios, the divine one, associated as the moon. Hence Dione and Zeus, as the name implies. At the oracle of Dodona, Zeus' consort was said to be Dione, by whom the Iliad states that he fathered Aphrodite.
which represents the eternal cycle of life, the eternal life cycle, which is what all of nature revolves around, and what all of this esoteric and all this mythology, all the symbolism, it's what it all revolves around. So that is your secret Masonic symbolism right there. That's what it all is. That's what it all means. I could go literally, like, just almost infinitely into depth about all the symbols, the etymology, the words, the language, and what it all means in itself. And I could divide those into many different contexts as well. So we could go on, we could go on forever exploring all of those concepts, and that's what the Symbols of Power film series is dedicated to. So this will just be a short overview of that. And so that's what, that's literally what Dionysus literally means. As in ancient Greek, Zeus it means pertaining to Zeus. As Dionysus was it was one of the offspring of the supreme lord of Zeus. So that's the prefix or the suffix of Zeus literally refers to Zeus. So Dionysus literally means comes from Dione or Dion. Dio, Deus, Deu, meaning two, or also Dione, literally meaning goddess in ancient Greek. So goddess and Zeus as God and goddess, united as one. Dionysus, Jesus. The Holy Trinity of Father, Mother, and Child, as combined and embedded with the literal symbolism of the Y, of the crossroads of the Trinity, emanating from the two principles between the Dione, Zeus. And of course, in Spanish or Latin, E means and, it means plus, it means with. So Dione with God, goddess with God, Dionysus. Which gets us into the essence. It's the whole essence of the Divine Trinity, which is the whole essence of the 47th problem of Euclid, which is the Pythagorean principle. But we will go so much deeper into this in separate presentations. Christus, Jesus Christos, God and Goddess united as one to create the divine third solar trinity, the solar child, the divine immaculate conception of the solar child, of the sun, of the cycles of nature and the cycles of the seasons, and the process of sexual fecundity and creation itself. The fertility of nature, which is what the wine, the crops, the harvest, the festival season, what it all represents. That's what the drunken revelry, why Dionysus is the god of wine and the harvest, and the cyclical celebration of the harvest festival. And that's why he is the slain harvest lord. He is cut up and slain into many pieces, just as Jesus, Osiris, Tammuz, on and on and on. these infinite epithets that are all just the same stories, the same archetypes told in different contexts, slightly different meanings from different cultures and different eras of history throughout time, but they are all the same timeless universal wisdom, the same simple story of astrotheology. So that's of course what Dionysus actually is God and goddess uniting, Dionysus, uniting as one, coming together at the same time. They literally, they come as one. You come with your partner, you come together as one, and you come and unite, both of you unite in communion with each other. You come in unison, you come together, you come union, which is literally, we cover this in Symbols of Power Part 2, all in depth. We will go so much deeper in future presentations as well. So that's what the Holy Communion actually is, the sacred communion, which in ancient Gnosticism is known, in Spermo-Gnosticism is known as the Sperma Communion, which literally means the communion of the sperm. It's the mixing of the two waters, the mingling of the two waters, the Hieros Gamos, which is literally the mixing of the gametes, of the intrafallopian gamete transfer, which is the gift. That's the gift of life. It is the game of love and the game of life. The Hieros Gamos, the sacred game, the sacred marriage, the union of the gamete. We will cover this so much more in depth in Symbols of Power. Is it part 4 or will it be part 5? I don't know, but it will be in one of my full feature films exploring navigating the maze and all of that, which I've shown clips here and there, and we'll be showing the same clip in some of my future films as well. But so that is what the sacred game, the sacred union is all about, and that's why, you know, the symbol that we're seeing here of the lemniscate, and you know, I like how Sasha, you know, added in a cardioid figure, or in other words, a heart shape at each side of the lemniscate, and topped by the central pillar, the central axis. So what this is this all comes from literally the esoteric anatomy of the human physiology, and so now you know why you become a conehead, and which is the old wise one, the wizard, the magus, the magi, is because you become the conehead. And this is yet again, as we covered in Symbols of Power, as I created in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3, is what I call as above, so below the belt, which is an extremely unique science that I came up with of how not just homologously, geometrically, mathematically, symbolically, linguistically, so many different ways and aspects that the different glands, various organs, parts of the body, all are either fractal representations of themselves, being, for example, like a homunculus, how I showed in Symbols of Power Part 2, which basically means a smaller version of yourself, you know, of your larger self. So basically how the penis is a direct fractal version of the spine itself, and is just an anagram allegory of the spine itself. Again, spine, penis, it's just an anagram of itself, as the spine is literally just a larger fractal of the penis. The penis is literally a smaller version of yourself, which is why your perineum is literally a fractal, smaller homunculus version of yourself, as I covered and discovered in Symbols of Power Part 2. So go back and see that full film for so much more about that. But so now you understand finally why you sit like an erect penis. And so now you understand why, as you sit erect, with your spine erect, you channel the cosmic energy. You become the cosmic sacred pillar of fertility, and just as you sit like the fertile erect penis, and you channel the cosmic orgasmic energy from the cosmos and through the earth, from the core of the earth and through out into the cosmos, unifying that sacred connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm. So you literally become in the flow of the plasma electric current. You become the lightning rod of God. But so this is yet another just tons more examples of as above, so below the belt, and I've got literally thousands more coming along the way that I have not even disclosed or revealed in any sort of way yet. So I'm figuring out how to work all of this in somehow in some sort of linear narrative fashion. So stay tuned for that. And so this is all from the book, and it will be in my full unfinished presentation drafts as well right now. So we will get much further and more in depth into these specific full presentations for just these few graphic slides alone. So we will do that at a different time. And so again, as we covered back in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3 especially, we covered the esoteric anatomy of the sacred seed of the pineal gland and of the penile glands, and of the omphalos, the navel of the world navel, the pine cone, which is the pine nut, and the pine nut is the sacred seed. So it is the flower, it is the seed, it is the dissemination of the flower of the seed of life, of the seed of creation, of the flower of life, of the physical human anatomy. It is on a universal cosmic scale from all orders of magnitude. That is the pine cone. It is the sacred seed of fertility. And put this symbolism together, and I'm writing this full symbolism in my upcoming book, what will be the Perineal Science of Immortality, and I will release those pieces as well in future films and stuff like that coming in the future. So I'm not sure when eventually it will come out, but I guess it has to come out now. So this is literally depicting the human body sitting full lotus. That's what you have. Your lemniscate is you're sitting on your perineum. Your perineum is literally the lemniscate. It is literally the infinite symbol. And as I discovered in Symbols of Power Part 3, the perineal muscle, the perineal muscles are literally the lemniscate infinity figure 8 figure, which is the perennial year, also means infinite or persistent or eternal. Perennial, and that's why I make the pun, and that's why the title of this book is a play on words, and it's a mashup of perennial and perineal, so that you can't tell the difference between the two, because I'm drawing the likeness between the two, between the perennial infinite or eternal cycle and the perennial eternal cycle on the cosmic scale, which is literally the direct as above, so below the belt correspondence between the cosmos, the macrocosmic scale, and the microcosmic scale in the human body, and the perineal muscles is just a fractal representation. And so I had sworn to myself that I wasn't going to make any original discoveries because I just don't have the time or the energy, but I could not help myself. This was absolutely, I found this pretty incredible, and I blew my own mind here. But into the book, that there's that again, as we covered earlier on, the initiation of the Gaia spore, or the sport, the ball sports, and all of that. We will be covering that in the Navigating the Maze presentation, but this is the origins of the baseball diamond, where we get the Freemasonic game, the Freemasonic pastime of the square and the compass of the baseball diamond, which again, as I covered in Symbols of Power Part 2, is actually, it comes from the urogenital triangle, from the urogenital and anal triangle combined, which is it's the basis of the square and the compass, which is the baseball diamond. So that's why you have the pitcher's mound is literally at the perineum, located in the center, or at the G spot in between the square and the compass, which is the gateway. It's the portal, it's the gateway, where the vagina is the portal of the opening, the sacred spiral, a spiral of life, where you come spiraling into this realm from the last. So now you know why we say you pitch or you catch when we're referring to sex. So now you understand why you take it. You're the pitcher and the catcher. And the sync being that one of the common, almost entirely consistent similarities of all these depictions of the analema or the lemniscus, corresponding to one portion being significantly larger than the other, or longer or larger than the other, and it's usually attributed to the solar or the masculine aspect having the dominant or the larger perspective of the ratio compared to the lesser, and it's corresponding to, again, solar and lunar, always corresponding to the Hyros Gamos of the limniscus. And so the consistency between almost always consistently between all of these limniscus is that the solar aspect being dominant is always consistent with the divine proportion. And so when I began to notice that, it became very apparent of how it manifests in so many ways, as above, so below the belt in the esoteric anatomy, as I've discovered and written here in the book. And it's also directly proportioned into a phi ratio, which is so that's another one of my original additions. And so I want to highlight here how particularly the length of the urogenital and anal triangles together is proportional to the golden mean proportion, wherein the length of the anal triangle equates to the ratio of 1. Whereas the ratio of the urogenital measurement corresponds to the measurement of B, which is 0.618. Ratio of 1 to 618 is proportional, wherein if you shrink this down, scale it, and so when we flip this and you measure from the apex of the pubic archway down to the anal sphincter, you also get again the golden ratio yet again, but it just measuring from different reference points. So we're literally just flipping the golden proportion and measuring it again, and then when we shrink it down again, and we measure from the apex of the pubic archway down to the anal sphincter, we also get the golden proportion yet again, measuring from the urogenital triangle region to just the length of the apex of the pubic archway to the anal sphincter yet again. So that's 3 ways that the golden proportion is measured right here in the perineal section. I swore to myself I wasn't going to make any new discoveries and make this a huge long thing, but of course I couldn't help myself. I ended up making these huge discoveries that correspond with so much of all of my other work. And so obviously what we can tell by what I've noticed here with the muscle structure of the perineal muscles of the female is, of course, it directly corresponds with the ancient terracotta goddess depictions of the fertility goddess statues, these fertility goddess figurines from Egypt as well as from ancient Cretan style and Minoan style Greek goddess statues, wherein they depicted the labyrinth at the center of her womb. Because the goddess uterus, as well as the goddess, the internal organs, the entrails, was literally the Greek labyrinth, and so we will cover this so much more in depth in my Symbols of Power Navigating the Maze full film that will be complete sometime. But so this is the exact representation, the exact synchronistic correspondence with how the female urethra directly corresponds with the location of the goddess head, as well as the distinctive, notorious upraised arms. And it's the exact same style of her feet emanating out in sort of a hyperbolic, a hyperboloid shape. And so I found this just completely blowing my mind. And so, of course, these figurines were the symbols of goddess fertility, of goddess fecundity, and of the fertility of life. Hence the womb as the origin of her labyrinth, her caverns, of her cavernosum. And so, of course, this fits with what I was just mentioning earlier on about how many different ways in my work that it directly, and we will cover much deeper in future films about how this corresponds to above the belt as well. But so we are just covering how it's literally a fractal version. You're literally a fractal homunculus of yourself. Literally, on the female goddess is literally a fractal version of herself depicted in her perineal muscles. And so again, I had discovered that the whole entire human brain. And so this is, of course, where again I've
found the perineal Ankh, literally the origin, if not the one of the most fundamental origins of the Ankh shape itself. Literally, the Ankh is the symbol of life and fertility and death and rebirth and resurrection. Literally the exact symbolism of the human female perineum, because of course the loop, that significant loop, or what is known as the Ru, which literally means mouth or gateway. And again, as Symbols of Power Part 2, we're referring to the south mouth, specifically. The gateway, the vaginal gateway, the passageway between realms, which is literally the exact shape of where the child passes through the perineal muscles, through literally the gateway, through the south mouth, the Ankh, the portal of life, which is literally the vaginal passageway, as well as also literally the Ru shape of the sacred egg, of the vaginal passageway. Literally the exact same shape as the pregnant stage of the pregnant uterus. The exact same sacred egg, golden egg shape. And I mean, this is entirely uncharted territory that I'm covering here, and I mean, this has not ever been revealed before. Brain and human skull is literally composed of the golden ratio egg geometry, as we covered back in Symbols of Power Part 3. But again, this corresponds exactly to the golden ratio egg, because notice how the pineal gland sits directly towards the back end of the brain and not directly dead center at the midline. Okay, so since I just ended up showing you that image of the golden mean spiral and the human skull, although that golden mean spiral, which is actually, which applies to the nautilus shell, that golden mean spiral actually really only applies to an elongated skull, as depicted here. But whereas a normal skull that's not elongated whatsoever actually follows a logarithmic spiral. And so this is a graphic that I've been holding on to for a little while now that was inspired by several different sources. Initially, the original concept, again, is by Gary Osborne, as we covered back in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3 film, particularly when I fully explained the significance of the all-seeing eye, the third eye, the inner chamber, the optic thalamus, and all of that good stuff, and I matched it with explained a lot of the etymologies and a lot of that stuff. That original concept of the pyramid overlaid with the brain originally comes from Gary Osborne, and this initial image here I also was originally saw from Rich Jarvis, Welcome to the Golden Page, had overlaid a snail shell on top of the Great Pyramid, inside the Great Pyramid as well. So what I've did is I've combined all of these and actually tested it for any efficacy or any legitimacy, because Gary Osborne's model was literally just a hand-drawn human skull, which literally had zero proportions to do with the actual human anatomy whatsoever. So I decided to correct it, or not correct it, but to actually, test it for legitimacy using an actual medically anatomical correct model. And so that's what I've done, is I've overlaid the human skull here inside of the Great Pyramid, and the dimensions, the reference points that I've used to align this is I've touched each edge of the skull with each edge of the inside of the pyramid, as well as the base touching the base of the pyramid. And I've actually got two models overlaid here. So on one I used the brain itself actually touching the pyramid, and the other one I used the edge of the skull itself, the cranial vault, matching the inner edge of the pyramid, and they both end up coming to pretty much an identical 0 point. And so the logarithmic spiral, which is a certain select few of snail shells, whereas the nautilus shell is a golden mean spiral, which is more elongated, so that actually doesn't apply, whereas a logarithmic spiral directly applies to the modern and most common human shape of the human skull, whereas the spiral follows along, and you can see here I've overlaid the nautilus shell on top of the logarithmic shell, or the logarithmic spiral, and so it comes around, and it comes up meets right where the pituitary is. It contours almost exactly contours the structure of the optic thalamus and the fornix. Comes back around for the end of my spiral as a reference point. I started here at the base of the pyramid and the skull, and I tracked the outline basically of the skull up until it crosses through to where it meets with the brain, and then it continues along with the contour of the skull, because again you would need an elongated skull for it to actually match. So you would have to flatten out this top of the skull here, basically truncate it, which was exactly what the tribal cultures did, was they flattened out the top of the forehead right here to elongate the skull to make it match the phi ratio spiral. And so it comes down and it strikes exactly where the pituitary infundibulum extends out at the exact same arc and the exact same contour with the thalamus and the fornix, and then sweeps down, passes back up directly right over the sarcophagus, aligning with the king's chamber, and crossing directly through where the pineal gland extends outward from the thalamus. So sweeps right up past the king's chamber and extends right past the pineal gland and outward, and it comes down and it meets here at the 0 point at something which basically aligns with this portion of the queen's chamber, a shaft on the queen's chamber, but nothing really. It sits just below the pineal gland, but the spiral does sweep right through the pineal gland's location. And so now you understand the true esoteric secret as to why the bishop's crozier or the staff is topped by the sacred logarithmic spiral, directly corresponding from the human skull. Where the logarithmic spiral comes up, contours the pons, comes up and around, and comes to a direct 0 point right at the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. Whereas the nautilus shell does not actually sync with the king's chamber, and it actually comes down and it sinks and comes to a crux, or comes to a 0 point here at the shaft of the queen's chamber, using the correct aspect ratio and not warping it and not distorting it whatsoever. It actually, the pineal gland is located right here, just below the shaft here, so it doesn't actually come to a direct culmination with the sarcophagus inside the king's chamber, so that would be incorrect, but it comes to a crux here, just below the shaft. So no, it actually doesn't. And the pituitary infundibulum hangs down. The pituitary actually fits inside the ascending passageway. The stalk of the pituitary infundibulum syncs perfectly with the gallery, and also it syncs perfectly with, again, since I aligned the nautilus shell. The nautilus shell is known for having these, I'm not exactly sure mathematically what you would classify them as, but there are these little ridges that are distinctive, well known for the nautilus shell, these little curved ridges inside the spiral, and the little curved ridges sync exactly with the arc and the exact shape of the pituitary infundibulum. And so those little lines, the phi ratio spiral syncs exactly with that, but the logarithmic spiral doesn't. See, as you can see, the logarithmic spiral comes way up and around like that, whereas the nautilus shell, the phi ratio spiral comes up, and that's what creates the thalamus shape and sweeps around and creates the shape of the curvature of the pons. And I didn't want to make this too long, but I wanted to include this somewhere, and I wasn't sure what type of presentation I would be able to present this in. So, and since it came up with the phi ratio spiral and the human skull just a second ago, I decided to go ahead and just transition into this slide and explain it as well. So yeah, I hope y'all think that's cool. It doesn't really apply to very much. You know, it's not very significant for as far as the for as far as this presentation goes, but it's highly significant in reference to go back and see Symbols of Power Part 2 for so much more about the explanation of that, of how, again, the King's Chamber is literally how I've corresponded it and correlated it to the thalamus, because by its etymology, again, of thalamus literally meaning an innermost chamber, or which is literally the third ventricle of the brain, is literally the innermost chamber, topped by the fornix, which literally means a vaulted archway, which is, again, the King's Chamber is directly culminated by a vaulted archway. So again, all these other things that we covered in Symbols of Power Part 2 that make it so significant. And of course, this made me sink immediately to the representation, symbolic representation that George Lucas was showing us, or maybe whoever the set or makeup designer was for Star Wars, for Princess Leia's iconic classic hairdo, which is obviously it's the exact same representation and comes to an identical correspondence or correlation with the logarithmic spiral of the human skull, coming to a culmination roughly at the point of the pineal gland, give or take. You know, it's not exactly identical as I just showed.
Okay, so I want to dive in a little bit deeper here and much more further into detail. So this is something that I was not expecting to find, and it absolutely blew my mind as to how incredibly intricate and just how perfect pretty much it all is. And I was not expecting to find that when I was testing this, basically the models of Gary Osborne's hypothesis from, I think it was from 2001. But so just testing this, I was not expecting to find. But just look at how the passageways of the Great Pyramid. Notice the ascending passageway is literally the exact correspondence with the nasal passageway. It's the nasal ascending passageway which meets up with the Grand Gallery, which is the optic passageway. So the nasal is the ascending passageway entering in, moving into the larger Grand Gallery of the optic pathways, then descending. If you continue straight, basically horizontally, laterally, you will continue on into the Queen's Chamber, which roughly corresponds a little bit higher up would be the pituitary gland, so that doesn't exactly fit, but it's pretty damn close. And if you continue ascending further up into the King's Chamber, you ascend into the innermost chamber, which is the third ventricle, the Holy of Holies, again, topped by the vaulted archway of the King's Chamber, which is the fornix, which literally means etymologically vaulted archway of the third ventricle, the innermost chamber, the King's Chamber. And just beneath that is the pineal gland, which directly corresponds. This is what really blew my mind, absolutely blew me away, is the exact angle, slope, and location of the air shaft passing directly through the pineal gland, entering into the third ventricle of the King's Chamber, directly corresponding exactly with the slope and angle and location of the occipital lobe. The differentiation, the divide, the gap between the occipital lobe, directly corresponding to the air shaft on the Great Pyramid. And another... And so let's go even deeper. And I want you to notice here the horizontal passageway leading from the ascending passageway, continuing straight, level, into the Queen's Chamber. I want you to notice this passageway right here. Check this out. Directly corresponds with the temporal bone. Directly corresponds with that little passageway, as well as the veins and arteries directly correspond with that passageway. Is that exact? Let me show you this here real quick, just in case, so if you're not seeing it. So again, check this out. Notice again the temporal bone directly corresponding with that passageway on the Great Pyramid. And And so now that I've got the skeletal and cardiovascular model up, this is yet even more absolutely mind-blowing, even more astounding. As if you notice this absolutely stunned me. It absolutely blew my mind. As if you notice the exact location of the superficial temporal veins and arteries directly passing through the location of the Queen's Chamber, following up just behind the jawline, directly passing up through the exact location of the Queen's Chamber, then taking a left-hand turn, angling over, and then directly ascending up directly through the location of the King's Chamber. So again, directly passing through the Queen's Chamber up into the King's Chamber. Look at that. It's absolutely astounding. It's absolutely stunning. Look at that. The exact location of the Queen's Chamber and the temporal arteries directly passing through the location of the Queen's Chamber up to the left, to the posterior, and into the King's Chamber, continuing on, radiating outward, directly corresponding with the rear, the posterior air shaft, and the frontal air shaft, directly corresponding to the frontal portion of the temporal vein, and directly corresponding to the posterior or the parietal branch of the temporal vein, directly corresponding with the angles and the radiations of the air shafts from the location of the King's Chamber. It's absolutely stunning. Alright, so we can dive even deeper here, and I want to show you guys this has absolutely astonished me even further, is this little feature that I noticed right here. Is I accidentally included, what I did here was these are the superficial veins and arteries, meaning again outside the skull and just beneath the surface of the skin. But I accidentally included in here some of the internal veins, which I'm glad I did, because it turns out that the internal carotid artery, which is literally the largest and most important artery, that is the main source of blood flow from the torso into the skull, the main artery, the main delivery of blood flow, one of the most crucial and critical, if not the most crucial and critical vein in the entire human skull, and one of the most crucial veins in the whole human body. And oftentimes this is most particularly on the left-hand side, the jugular vein, the left and anterior descending, also nicknamed the Widowmaker, because these are the arteries and the veins that are consistently cause a significant portion of strokes and heart attacks, as from cholesterol blockage in these arteries here. So crucial, absolutely crucial arteries, and it directly corresponds precisely, identically with that seemingly weird. There's these weird, seemingly purposeless shafts that extend out from the Queen's Chamber, that literally directly corresponds to the internal carotid artery, which then takes an angle and directly follows the angle of the Grand Gallery, of the ascending Grand Gallery. So it directly contours and shows this exact angle within the human body, within the Great Pyramid. Directly correspondent. It's absolutely astonishing. And I mean, this is absolutely unprecedented, this level of detail and this level of sync. And so I forgot to point this out, but I also wanted to point this out while I got you here, is I wanted to point out that what really stood out to me is how the descending passageway branches off into that. It takes a fork. It takes that forked pathway and branches off, exactly as the facial veins, again, take that branched fork. And even though they don't sync up and they don't align here, the passageways of the Great Pyramid are actually proportioned further back than on the human anatomy. But the correspondence is still there, and it's still astonishing. It's just like, I mean, how perfect can you
actually build it, in the physical world. Like, how well can you accurately model, the human anatomy? It's pretty much impossible. And yet here it somehow, here it freaking is. Here it is. There it is. The forked path. It's absolutely, it boggles the mind. It begs the question. And so let's go even further. Let's correspond this yet even further. It goes even deeper. If you notice, this is highly telling. If you notice, notice the exact location again. So this is actually depicting all of the human faculties right here. It's depicting the vocal, the significance of the vocal and the speech as the descending passageway would be descending at essentially the esophageal passageway. In other words, the food intake, the nourishment intake, descending down into nourishing the body, whereas the other ones are the ascending faculties, ascending up into the higher cognitive centers of the brain. So you have the nasal passageway, optic passageway into the optic thalamus, radiating out into the most high of the radiant crown. Directly, the passageways are directly corresponding to the corona radiata of the internal portions of the nerve fibers, which radiate out through the cerebrum. The exact angles and slope and correspondence of the corona radiata, which literally means the radiant crown. So the higher faculties passing up into the innermost chamber, the inner sanctum, and radiating outward, which essentially, we could speculate as to what the purpose of this great pyramid actually was, if we want to speculate based upon highly credible engineers' perspectives, suggesting that it was some sort of power plant, and whether we want to correlate that to being an amplifier of human consciousness, whether from somehow entering into the chambers as a sort of a temple, or even just radiating outward towards the outward population, basically amplifying or magnifying human consciousness. What if the ancient Egyptians and their purpose was actually far more sophisticated and far more advanced than anything that we've been led to believe by mainstream Egyptology? What if the ancient Egyptians had a vast, larger scale and larger scope of human consciousness than we could even fathom? And so this descending passageway nourishes the body. Look at how it directly corresponds with the hyoid bone, directly joining to the hyoid bone at the exact precise location, which would be the vocal cords, which would be the speech, the voice, the sound resonance, where you have the sound, smell, sight, hearing here at the Queen's Chamber, the exact location of the ventral cochlear nucleus, which is exactly the hearing, located right here at the Queen's Chamber at the temporal lobe. You've got the cognitive functions at the King's Chamber, and then you've got the higher mind, the higher cognitive functions of the cerebrum, of the corona radiata, directly corresponding all of this. And so let's go even deeper and even further. So let's notice the exact correspondence of basically the slope angle of the escape shaft of the descending passageway, directly corresponding to the slope angle. You've got the human jaw sloping up, spiraling around, directly corresponding to the logarithmic spiral, directly corresponding. And so let me show you the human skull here. And so notice this here, the exact spiral directly corresponding to the spiral of the human skull, directly corresponding. So notice this spiral yet again. Let me show you this again. The direct angle of the spiral, notice how it ascends. It directly corresponds to the sharp angle of the Grand Gallery. The entrance of the Grand Gallery directly corresponds to that sharp angle coming from the bottom angle of the jaw, up past the jaw and up, directly corresponding, which exactly corresponds to the exact location of the zygomatic bone, which is the cheekbone. Notice this. Check this out. So again, notice the exact prominence of the zygomatic bone corresponding exactly right there past the orbit, which is the eye socket, directly corresponding to not only the logarithmic spiral, but also directly corresponding to that entrance of that sharp angle and the entrance to the Grand Gallery. Check this out. Okay, so check this out. Notice the exact correspondences. between the hyoid bone down at the throat, at the vocal shot, down at the throat, between the grand gallery and the zygomatic bone right here at the sharp angle of the grand gallery, the slope, which directly corresponds to the facial veins, directly corresponding to that descending escape shaft of the descending passageway, directly corresponding to the cardiovascular system of the facial veins, directly passing down. Check that out. Look at how it almost exactly corresponds to the location and the slope angle of that descending passageway, the facial veins. And then directly corresponding with the temporal bone, yet again, check this out. And then the exact location, again, of the superficial temporal vein. Directly corresponding, Queen's Chamber, King's Chamber, Corona Radiata with the air shafts. Directly, I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. It's absolutely astounding.
Where the midline, direct midline of the human brain is actually directly nicks that point here, directly where the optic chiasm crosses at the crux of the optic nerves of the brain, whereas the pineal gland sits just offset in the golden proportion towards the back of the brain, which is exactly where the egg yolk, or the central sun within the golden ratio egg, where the egg yolk sits inside the egg geometry, is exactly where the golden egg yolk, the golden sun of the pineal gland, sits directly as the egg yolk inside the golden ratio egg, as we covered in Symbols of Power Part 3. And so again, the entire internal structure and the optic nerve relay is following the flux, or following the flow, or the vector of a standing harmonic wave, performing that lemniscus, or that figure 8 shape. So I want to show this beautiful imagery created by Neurodome, and the amazing thing about diffusion tensor imaging is that it is able to detect the diffusion of water. So what's amazing about it is the different colors correspond to the different directions that each set of fibers or paths are running. So the green is actually from front to back, and the imaging pathways only run in one direction. The diffusion path of water only runs one direction, and so you're seeing that unidirectional flow. The red pathways run laterally from side to side, and the purple pathway runs from top to bottom, or from bottom to top, runs up and down. And so what makes this so useful is that when there's an injury, it actually blocks the flow of diffusion, and so you can easily observe the diffusion pathways, and you can tell where there's been an injury or where there is damage done from either lesions, tumors, aneurysms, things of that nature. And so this force that creates this standing wave formation, or this bipole, this dual toroidal dynamic that is found throughout all of nature, and of course it only occurs around electrical filaments, which run on a universal scale, generated in plasma by electricity. These electromagnetic effects, either they tighten, it constricts, and it coils, which is the essence of the Hindu meaning of kundal, meaning constriction, meaning strangling or coiling. Again, as I covered in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3, is the very meaning of the perineal muscles, of the anal sphincter of the perineal muscles. Literally means is a constricting, a contracting, a constriction, which is an electric force of charge, which is, it creates strength. It's a force
of electromagnetism that creates charge, which creates force, and power, which is it creates contraction, which is how all of biology functions. Electrical biology functions through musculature, is through the constriction and the contraction, which generates power. So the greater electric force, the greater electric charge, the greater constricting power, the greater implosive force can be generated. The plasma Z-pinches are of special interest to the electric universe theory, especially those with the natural result of pairs of Birkeland currents interacting with themselves. In other words, these standing motion waves. And of course, this is the structure that creates the entire physiology of the human brain. It's the structure that creates so many forces also throughout nature. It's literally the hyperboloid, which, as we covered back in the previous films, we covered the various aspects of the toroidal dynamic of the brain, and we'll cover this much deeper in future films as well. But so this is the toroid, the very heart, the very core of the toroid itself is the Z-pinch, is the hyperboloid. It's literally the Holy Grail, as literally depicted in Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones. The correct Holy Grail was the one with the Z-pinch, which is the very same shape as it's of the rocket fuel, the rocket nozzle, which is the very same essence that creates the X chromosome of the human of the male. All right, so this is absolutely unbelievable. This is the actual official logo or promo feature for Netflix, for the image promo for the Dark Crystal on Netflix. And it's literally, I mean, how could I make this up? It's literally everything I've just been explaining throughout this whole film. It's literally everything, all encompassed. It's absolutely unbelievable. And Jim Henson, very interestingly, Jim Henson himself is actually an adept theosophist. He's been a practicing theosophist for several decades now, at least. And but who knows whether he's the actual graphic artist that designed this official promo artwork. But either way, it's exactly everything to the identical detail that we've covered already throughout this, and will be throughout this entire film. It's literally, again, the greater and the lesser forceps directly corresponding to the human brain, directly corresponding to the internal pathways of the internal capsule of the corona radiata, of the exact, complete with the lentiform nucleus, with the grand trine of the Dark Crystal, the grand trine, directly corresponding with the plane of inertia and directly corresponding with the location of the lentiform nuclei on each side of the internal capsule. Literally exactly crossing the exact same point, identical with the optic chiasm, or optic chiasma, however you want to say it, pronounce it. I like to say chiasm because it comes from key. And then, of course, with the lesser forceps directly corresponding with the location of the golden sun of enlightenment, directly corresponding with the location on the scarabaeus holding aloft the golden sun. And this is why they're exactly depicting the two entwining circuits, entwining the crystal and culminating at the cap, culminating at the most high of the enlightenment of the radiant sun, the corona radiata, directly corresponding with everything that I've covered throughout this entire picture. So it's absolutely stunning. Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. It's absolutely astounding. It's absolutely astonishing that, I mean, everything I've discovered here with the Dark Crystal corresponding to everything that I've been showing allegorically throughout this film. It's blowing my mind, and I only just now discovered this, like, later on, right at the end of the production of this film. So I'm so glad, I can't believe I noticed this.
So the 0 point of the standing wave or this harmonic wave is again, it comes to a crux. It comes to the direct cross. Is literally the crux of the brain. It's literally the cross of the brain, which is where the universal mythical hero is crucified upon the tree, upon the sacred tree, or upon the sacred cross.
And so this is exactly the tree of life where the resurrection takes place, where the resurrected, the slain God is crucified, and where the slain God is resurrected. And this is why the slain God is always depicted as being crucified on the tree. We find this in Conan the Barbarian, crucified upon the tree of woe. Again, echoing this mythology of Woden, crucified upon the tree, upon the Yggdrasil tree. And again, the various depictions of Odin are also depicted as the hanged man, again depicting the death of the season, the underworld of Saturn, the hanged Lord hanged upside down upon the cross, what is known as St. Andrew's cross, the cross of the upside down crucifixion. Which again is the essence of the hanged man. So again, the path of the fool of Jesus throughout the year, from the spring to the winter, and on and on and on throughout the path of the sun. So from resurrection from death to resurrection and eternal life.
And so again, this crux comes to an exact point to an exact 0 point again at the optic chiasm, which is literally that comes from chi, meaning cross. It's literally the crossing over point between realms, which is why the Z pinch, the 0 point, is literally where energy crosses over from one plane of existence into another. So it's literally the veil between the two halves, which are separated, the two hemispheres of the dual toroidal dynamic, which is separated by the dielectric plane of inertia, which again, as Ken Wheeler mentioned in the earlier part of the video, when the dielectric plane of inertia is too long to distribute evenly, to divide the polarities evenly, it distributes itself in a helicoil dynamic, or in other words, a standing wave harmonic, as we are observing here in the human brain. Filaments of the coaxial cables of the electrical circuit of the electrical coil that create the Z pinch in the brain, that create that 0 point, which is literally the dielectric plane of inertia corkscrewing around the electric pulse perturbations. Or actually what we're seeing here is the bilateral symmetry of the human brain is actually also a dielectric plane of inertia within a larger toroidal dynamic. So this is actually, it's a quadrupolar, the brain is actually a quadrupolar toroidal dynamic. And I'm not even sure exactly what that looks like, but it's exactly Walter Russell's models of the sun, which are all quadrupolar magnets. It's a quadrupolar magnetism. So rather than being just a singular toroidal dynamic, which it could be, but it actually displays further features of a dual toroidal dynamic, which is why it creates this bi-bowl structure, as we'll cover in so many other films and have covered previously, is the bi-bowl structure of, again, as we mentioned, Primerfield series, and we'll continue to go through that even deeper in future film series. But which is, so okay, this is going to be hard to depict with all the editing that I'm doing here, but so okay, let me explain all of this, what we are breaking down here. So sorry that this is very hard to portray without covering up a lot of my captions and overlaying some of the other graphics while covering some of them up. But so again, this is why the Shroud of Turin, and most of this was inspired and taught to me by my good friend Christopher Lord, Truth Heresy House of Wisdom. And so he's the one that had first pointed out and discovered that the Shroud of Turin is actually the symbolism of the horned god, the ancient horned one, which the Shroud of Turin literally means Torino. It comes from Torino, which literally means bull. And bull literally comes from the etymology of bull. And this is where I will...
So now you'll understand why they're depicting, why they the people who forged the Shroud of Turin in order to convince the public, the fools, that this is actually a historical piece of evidence from a historical real Jesus, which is not the case at all. They're just simply showing the actual adept initiates, such as Christopher Lord and myself. They're showing the true adept who has far sight to be able to see the deliberate, overt, mirrored as above so below of the Bi-Bowls, depicting the Isis crown, the Isis and hair headdress, the Bi-Bowl dynamic, depicting the solar horns of the bull god of the Bible, and why they're showing you the solar calf, the child of the divine immaculate solar conception of Isis, with the statue of Isis with the solar child Horus depicted on her lap, which is why they deliberately depicted Jesus as the horned one, as the solar horned bull god of the Bible, of whose father was Saturn El, Cronus, which is why he has the crown of thorns, which comes etymologically from a crown of horns, from Hebrew keren, which is corona, crown, coronas, chronos, the solar, and we can't even begin to go into that. It takes us off into a whole other presentations and books in and of themselves, so we will have to go deeper into that for another presentation. We'll go deeper into this solar horned bull child in my Navigating the Maze film, and also in my next Symbols of Power series that this clip is an excerpt from, so we'll get much deeper into that. Which is why now you understand why the horned one is the one who is sacrificed on the brainstem, is the horned one. Graphics here in just a moment, but we'll get to that in a second. But so it's the symbolism, it's the very symbolism of the Bi-Bowls, of the Bible, the Bi-Bowls of the dual plasma torus, the dual torus dynamic. So again, this is literally the core of the torus dynamic. It's the hyperboloid. The hyperboloid is what literally creates the Z-pinch creates that hyperboloid shape, which again is the rocket, the exactly what gives rocket engines its force of thrust, which is what gives this electricity. It's the force of charge that creates the implosive force.
3-point charges. And that's also what it would look like for, say, a water molecule, where you have 2 positive hydrogen charges and a negative oxygen charge. Well, partial charges. But still the field will look the same in shape. Okay, now let's introduce a 4th charge. And that's what the electric field from a quadrupole looks like. How beautiful is that? That looks like 2 fields from 2 dipoles. And that's how you can think of a quadrupole. It's just 2 dipoles next to each other. That's the electric field from multiple point charges.
That crushes, that pinches this energy, constricts it and crushes it into forming matter, into forming like pearls on a string.
And so I've also just realized that this exact is also the entire essence of the Vedic Hindu Buddhist depictions of the Dorje. And so I want to take a few moments to dive deeper into this to explain just how freaking incredible and amazing and absolutely mind-blowing. Like I told myself I was not going to make any original discoveries, and here, like, I'm just one after another, I'm just layering all of this stuff is literally one after another. It's just, I'm blowing my own mind time and time again, just consistently and non-stop here. I mean, it's literally it's blowing my mind. So I want to take some time to explore, just to marvel at how incredible this symbolism is. It's just absolutely astounding how the contours of the Vajra or the Dorje is literally exactly identical to both the minor and the major
forceps of the neural pathways of the corpus callosum, and directly how the center, I forget what the centerpiece of the Dorje is, I will have to look that up here in a moment, but the centerpiece of the Dorje exactly corresponds again to the optic chiasm, is literally at the exact center, and I mean, it's just, you can't make this up. Look at the exact harmonic sine wave symbolism of the Vajra, or of the Dorje, completely identically mirroring the greater and lesser forceps, as well as notice the exact direct correspondence of the center of the Dorje, of the Vajra, literally identically matching the negative space in between the hemispheres of the brain. I mean, it doesn't get any more. And look at how the neural pathways literally contour exactly. They contour the exact shape of the entire neural pathways. It is identical. It's freaking astounding. It's astonishing is what this is. It's absolutely, this is groundbreaking. And so the dual forceps shape of the forceps of the brain is the exact same morphology of the Z pinch of the cerebrospinal tract of the central spinal column of the spinal cord, where the cross section is where the Hindu Vedic system of yoga gets the symbol for the third eye, which is the third eye, or the Ajna chakra, is literally the symbol of the cross section of the cerebrospinal tract, of the ascending and descending tracts of the pathways, which are literally the angels ascending and descending Jacob's ladder to heaven, and in Jacob's vision, where, as we covered in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3, all about the ascension, we will cover so much deeper in future films as well. We will go much deeper into all of that, so I wasn't even going to reveal this, but it's the exact same morphology of the Z pinch, and the exact same as the Vajra, as the Dorje, is literally the exact same symbolism of the thunderbolt of the gods, of the third eye, of the crown, the Ajna chakra, of literally, which is why it's the exact same morphology of the neural tracts and the neural pathways of the third eye, of literally the optic chiasm.
The Dorje, or diamond scepter, is a Tibetan spiritual ritual implement of great beauty and utility. The Dorje is an artistic archetypal representation of the ultimate spiritual dynamic, functioning as an active meditative component, a form energy transceiver. Dorje and its corresponding Sanskrit term Vajra generally translate as thunderbolt or diamond. This symbolically represents the irresistible force of the thunderbolt and the indestructible qualities of the diamond. The Dorje has archaic roots in the thunderbolt of Indra, the Hindu Jupiter. The form of the Dorje as a scepter or a weapon appears to have its origin in a single or double trident, which arose as a symbol of the thunderbolt in many ancient civilizations. Parallels have been suggested with the Teutonic god Thor's meteoric hammer, as well as the thunderbolt scepters of Zeus and Jupiter. The ancient Rig Veda identifies Indra's Vajra as a notched metal club with 1,000 prongs. Further ancient sources identify the Vajra as having open prongs, unlike the Buddhist Dorje, which has closed prongs. According to legend, Buddha took the Vajra weapon from Indra and forced its wrathful open prongs together, thus forming the peaceful Buddhist scepter with closed ends, absorbing and sealing within the unbreakable and indestructible power of the thunderbolt. The Vajra is the quintessential symbol of Vajrayana Buddhism, which derives its name from the Vajra itself. This is the supreme path of Buddhism, the thunderbolt or diamond wisdom. The true meaning of the Vajra, or Dorje, is far more comprehensive than merely being a thunderbolt scepter weapon of some local god. The Dorje represents the highest spiritual power, that which is irresistible, invincible, indestructible, and inexhaustible, free from conflicting emotions. In Tibetan, Do means stone, and Urji means master, and the master stone is considered to be the diamond for its nobility, purity, clarity, and ultimate hardness.
Can't stop thinking of your diamond. He left her lonely with the diamond.
The master stone is, of course, the philosopher's stone, or prima materia of the alchemists, and this symbolism is apropos for the Dorje. The secret of the Philosopher's Stone is that anyone who attains it cannot use it successfully for base purposes, such as riches and physical immortality, as such intent leaves one spiritually dead. The true Philosopher's Stone is not a physical object, but rather an awareness of the transformative power of awakened consciousness. The future is transmuted from the past by our current actions in the ever-present now. We hold the power of responsible freedom as both our birthright and obligation on our path of spiritual evolution. The two sides of the Dorje can be seen not only in the polarities of male and female, night and day, hot and cold, and so on, but also as the most dynamic of our experiential polarities, matter and spirit. And matter and spirit are reconciled in the thunderbolt of awareness, where we become the undifferentiated singularity of enlightenment and perceive all as one. Subjective and objective, united as a fundamental awareness. This is the ultimate tantric doctrine. In its symbolic artistic form, the Dorje is a scepter, the emblem of supreme, sovereign power, hence the diamond scepter. It is the unmovable axis of the world around which the mandala of psychocosmic experience revolves. The Dorje's form corresponds directly to its function. The Dorje is an archetype of universal polarities, as two mirror image mandala heads emanate from the central point. The venoms of mortality are represented on one side, with the wisdoms of enlightenment on the other. Astute meditators gain awareness of many correlations. There are three stages of the Dorje: Bindu, Lotus, and Mandala, representing spirit, mind, and body, respectively. The central sphere is the Bindu, or seed of the mandala, which creates the universe. As the universe emerges from the unmanifest state, it forms into the minuscule point of the Bindu, where undifferentiated unity splits into duality, and our paths to awakening in the mandala begin.
And I equate the diamond with the sacred pearl, the sacred innermost ornament, the diamond wisdom of the mother of pearl, which is the rare gem found at the center of the flesh, which directly corresponds to the exact symbolism of the lentiform nucleus and the corona radiata, corresponding directly with the oyster and the pearl, the precious gem found within the soft flesh.
From the unity of the focal Bindu seed spring two opposing 8-petal lotus blossoms, representing the dualistic nature of manifest reality as perceived consciously. The symbolism of the lotus is as the meditation seat of the enlightened.
And you ride the flow of the flower of life that emits the phase conjugate electromagnetic radiation of the vortex mechanics of the inner crystal of the pineal gland of the capstone. And you ride the flow to infinity and beyond, in the fluorescence, in the light, which is the enlightenment sitting in the enlightenment of the conical pinnacle.
Which, remember, I mentioned at the very beginning of the film was that the dense panicle, the pinnacle is literally the dense panicle in botany.
Forming their buds and their fruits so it's found all throughout botany and biology, which is the dense conical shape on the top of the stalk. And of course, inflorescence literally means I begin to flower, which in other words, to blossom. And of course, this is phonetically identical to inflorescence, which literally means in the bright light. Inflorescence in physics literally means the emission of light or other electromagnetic radiation, also meaning the light so emitted. Coined by physicist George Stokes from fluorspar essence. And fluorspar literally means a mineral crystal, a halide or a salt mineral composed of calcium fluoride.
From each lotus blossom emerge 5 rays of power, which converge at a higher point on each side. Dynamic archetypal polarities are represented by the 2 sides of the Dorje. On one side is this spatial realm we inhabit as physically incarnate humans. The other, the subjective counterspatial realm of mind and spirit. There are also Dorjes with 9 rays on each end, the 4 primary and 4 intermediate cosmic directions around the world axis. These 9 can also represent the Buddha and his Eightfold Path, or the 9 vehicles or stages of the Nyingma, or Tibetan Old School Buddhist tradition. The 5-rayed Dorje contains the core archetype of the holy mountain Meru, surrounded by the 4 quarters of the universe. From end on, these 5 rays can be seen as the Vajrayana mandala of the Dahani or meditation Buddhas. It consists of 4 stages around a central stage, the central stage being the expression of the quintessence in its Dahani Buddha form. The 4 surrounding stages, the remaining Dahani Buddhas, can be seen in many ways: the 4 phases of the day, 4 directions, 4 seasons, 4 ancient elements, 4 states of matter, 4 ethers. This fundamental quadrature structure pervades as a divine metric of our experiential earth existence, and the mandala is the map. These Dahanis are not sentient beings who have attained Buddhahood. These Buddhas are projections of the highest potential of that which exists within each of us, the principle of enlightenment, spiritually differentiated into our total being. This is not about attaining enlightenment. This is about maintaining those moments of enlightenment we all have at times. The Buddha nature lies within. We are already awake, our natural state of being. The material plane distracts us from our finest awareness through uncontrolled sensory input, emotive reactions, and false beliefs. To dissolve the distractions, one meditates on the Dahani Buddhas as representatives of what are termed the skandhas, our 5 aggregates of consciousness, being consciousness in its totality of physical and non-physical existence. Form, our physical beings. Feeling, both inner and outer sensation. Cognition, the processing of experience, and volition, intentional activity. These 5 together comprising an individual's total life experience. The central Dahani Buddha is Vairochana, the skandha of total consciousness, both encompassing and emanating the 4 Dahani quadrants of the outer circle. Here we find the wisdom of the universal law. Vairochana's symbol is the wheel, the setting into motion, the great wheel of life, which allows the transformation of ignorance into absolute awareness. The wheel of life contains 6 realms, 3 of the upper world, representing illusions of happiness, and 3 of the lower world, representing illusions of misery. These can be related to the 6 bardos or intermediate stages we pass through, 3 in life and 3 in death.
Which is, of course, the Dorje is also known as the thunderbolt of the gods, or what I would call what I've often called in some of my other videos as the rod of God, and I use that as the reference to the cosmic pillar once again for back to Symbols of Power Part 3. But so this Dorje was wielded by one of the devas, Indra, in the Mahabharata, which was capable, the weapon basically essentially capable of wiping out entire civilizations, a super weapon, referring to plasma discharge and plasma physics. And it's also equated to the thunderbolt of Zeus. Again, the thunderbolt, it's also known as the thunderbolt of the gods. And the Dorje itself was the predecessor, and then also became wielded as the Vajra. And the Dorje was essentially the peaceful, protective aspect before the weapon had been used, and after the rod of God had been used, the lightning bolt had been struck, it opened up and became the Vajra, the weapon of death and destruction. And so this is the exact essence of everything everything I'm showing here. It's literally the essence of the plasma physics, of the Bibles of physics. Okay, so it just continues to get even more astounding and even more amazing. And so thus far I've shown how this exact morphology also, it encompasses not only the Egyptian Ankh, but it encompasses the cross, the Ankh, as well as the monad. And all of these are legitimate symbols of rebirth, fertility, immortality, life, generation, the morphogenesis of the individual out of the unity, out of the union of individuated consciousness or soul, out of the union of infinity. And so it's all right here. Pythagoras had said, "Know thyself, and ye shall know the gods and the universe." And this is what it's all about. The horns of the mercurial horns of the monad, as the Taurus, as the bull of heaven, is directly correspondent to the forceps minor in the brain. And this is the most astounding thing about this is that the circumpunct of the monad, the singular point, the period, the dot, the circumpunct, is exactly correspondent to the pituitary gland. And again, this is exactly phi ratio direct correspondence to the pineal gland down behind it. So it's pinpointing precisely the pituitary and the pineal down below it. So we've got the horns of the forceps minor. Here's the pituitary located right here. It directly contours the forceps minor. It contours the anterior and the posterior limbs of the internal capsule of the corona radiata, the lentiform nucleus just off to the side, and then the pineal gland and the forceps major directly corresponding at the posterior. And I want to read this. I had come across this, and it's literally one of the best. I mean, it's pure gold. I mean, this guy is a genius, and I have no idea who he is. But I just checked the information on his blog, and it said he recently died in 2015, and he was an architect and a couple other things, and they archived his page for in tribute. But yeah, this is it's absolutely great. So I want to share this with you guys. I mean, it's absolutely spot on. It is completely accurate in my opinion. I mean, I am totally on board with what he's presenting here, because it's everything that I've come across from my own self-discovery and interpretations of everything as well. The Vajra or Dorje is a conception of the electromagnetic behavior of the sun in respect to the other orbiting planets. And I don't know if he hand drew these or what, but they are absolutely astounding drawing, just absolutely stunning. And it's beautiful, and it's entirely accurate as well, because in the electric universe theory, the sun is powered externally by giant electrical currents known as Birkeland currents, and it is giant filaments of electric magnetic currents flowing all throughout the universe, exactly as we have those same currents microcosmically in our own brains, because it is a universal pattern. It is a pattern of energy that feeds itself all the way down fractally, the same way that large vessels, large dendrites become smaller capillaries, all at all scales throughout nature. And so it is this cosmic rope, this magnetic rope that feeds from the sun, passes through the earth, and we know that rope connects to the North Pole of Saturn as well. So it passes through the earth, creates this, and this is exactly what I will be I'm not sure if I've shown it yet, but I will show this at some point. This is the exact same homologous representation of the synapses of the human brain, as well as the joints of the knee or certain joints of the skeleton structure. And of course, it is the world axis, the world pillar, the cosmic axis of the polar axis of the Earth, the electromagnetic field, the dielectric plane of inertia. So it's a beautiful illustration of the Earth-Sun electromagnetic relationship. And so what we see here in this amazing drawing by him, and I love just how beautiful his curves are. Oh, dude, that sounds so gay. But no, seriously, like I love how beautiful the curves that he draws are, just like so perfect. The trajectories are just so pleasing to the eye, and they're so beautifully drawn. And but yeah, so what he's depicting here is, it's so perfectly that, like, I can't believe I just randomly came across this just by totally unrelated occurrences. But so again, it's the quadrupole, or a pair of dipoles. And I love how, just again, the way the curves are drawn is visually, you can just see you can capture that visual pattern of the flow of each dipole, and it's just beautiful. But yeah, it's an amazing drawing. Exactly what I was explaining earlier about the quadrupolar dynamic of the sun. Filaments carrying current in the same direction are attracted to one another. They will collimate, which means to make parallel, to bring into line. So in other words, they dance and do this spiral with each other. The filaments exhibit both long-range attraction and short-range repulsion. Together, these two forces cause the filaments to twist around one another. This geometric combination of the electric and magnetic forces produces a radial force on nearby ions and electrons inwards towards the centers of the filaments. In other words, the filaments act as ion sumps, clearing the surrounding space of matter, which is, again, creating that sine wave pattern of repulsion and attraction. Once these elements approach the filaments, the process of Markland convection radially sorts them into concentric rotating cylinders. Helium forms a diffuse outer layer, followed by a hydrogen layer. Then oxygen and nitrogen in the middle layers, and iron, silicon, and magnesium. If the charge density increases, both the geometry and the state of the plasma can transition into a Z-pinch. Z-pinches are incredibly powerful scavengers. They can condense this matter into spherical balls of plasma, like beads on a string.
And so this is an original correspondence that I had just made. I've done previous writings in the past, and you guys may have seen from my Winged Crown of the Immortal Gods presentation, which is now I've restricted it to patrons only, because that will be coming in future films as well. So we'll go so much deeper into that. But again, as I showed in that, was again how Schwaller de Lubitsch had discovered and shown the correlations between the Egyptian Scarabaeus and directly being the same exact morphology and homologous image of the human brain, of the human skull, of the human cranial vault, with the same actual sutures corresponding to the human skull. And but I've gone even further, and I've actually noticed that it's fractal again. So it's not just the skull at large; it's actually literally the depiction of the diencephalon itself. Again, the two-headed bulb at the top of the staff is literally, and that's literally the exact same physical dynamic that the ancient Egyptians were depicting here with this imagery of the Scarabaeus, is literally depicting the body of the corpus callosum, which composes the dual toroidal, or the bi-bowl dynamic of the forceps minor and the forceps major. Again, you have a major and a minor, corresponding again to the major aspect being the sun, the minor aspect being the moon. So of course, they have it actually, reversed here, but or the image is actually flipped upside down. So of course it's the same exact dynamic. The larger, the greater is the solar aspect, the masculine principle, and the lesser is the feminine or the lunar principle. So that's exactly what they are depicting here. As I covered earlier on with the phi ratio dynamic of the lemniscus, again being solar and in phi proportion to the lunar being the lesser. So that's exactly why they're showing the wings of the scarabaeus is literally representative of the insula, is literally representative of the very core body of the corpus callosum, showing us that either the ancient Egyptians knew a lot more about physiology and human anatomy than we have ever attributed or given them credit for, or that it's literally, this is a major cosmic universal sync of synchromysticism working its way throughout our entire body of knowledge and physics as we know it. So it's literally just could just be a universal sync that is pretty much just like too coincidental to even be coincidence. So I would lean towards the latter, is that the ancient or the former is that the ancient Egyptian actually had prior knowledge much more advanced than we basically even could conceive of, or at least give them credit for. But so again, this is the literal hyperbolic, the hyperboloid dynamic that creates the very core structure, the hyperboloid structure inside the very core of the human brain, which is literally, again, created by the electromagnetism. And so this has much greater significance for the diencephalon and the scarabaeus, and we will go into that in full separate presentation on its own, just for that topic alone. But so again, this is the universal hyperbolic principle that creates the Z-pinch of the intersecting Birkeland filaments, which create the X chromosome, which create, again, the mortal coil, the electric currents which create the DNA, and again the cosmic universal electric currents which create, again, the hyperbolic 0 point with the Z-pinch crushing it at the center into form, producing light and energy and heat, which is again exactly what is created by the thrust of the rocket engine, creating the combustion force with the Z-pinch.
All right, so let's crack it on open here, boy. And it's pretty well commonly known due to the prominence and the weight of Schwaller de Lubitz's work on Egyptology, and especially in the realm of symbolism and linguistics and ancient mathematics, is literally probably second to none. It's just some of the most superb quality information that you will ever find anywhere. And so he had originally made the symbolic connection of the Egyptian scarabaeus to the actual human anatomy of the human skull, where the frontal lobes are the entire sutural structure of the human cranium is exactly identical to the scarabaeus. And this is, again, it's homologous morphology throughout biology, throughout all of nature. And so we share the frontal lobe with the same segments of the scarab's back, of the scarab carapace, the exoskeleton, as well as the parietal lobes being the wings of the scarab, and as well as the occipital lobe, even included directly there at the very back, at the very bottom of the Egyptian marriage scarab. And the sutures are all there as well. The coronal suture is that notable suture that separates the three segments of the human skull from the main three segments, the Trinity, which creates that Tau cross, the letter T there, which is the way, the truth, and the life. The Tau cross, I am the way, I am the Tao, the Tao. The Tao is the way, so the truth, the way, the light. At the crown of the skull is literally the opening of the spreading of your wings, the opening of your psychic crown, and spreading your psychic wings and taking flight which is what the scarabaeus represents. And I'm not going to cover too much about the scarab, because again, that's a whole other film and presentation that we will be getting into just on all of this science alone. It's so profoundly vast and so incredibly insightful. But so I had also, so since that was well known, I had also eventually noticed through my research, I noticed that there was this particular drawing, this anatomical diagram of the human diencephalon. Really, like I immediately noticed there with the bands of myelinated axons on each of the thalami, the thalamic nucleus, that really tipped. I was like, that looks exactly like the frickin' scarab, and so that reminded me of Schwaller's work, and so I had immediately, made the connection. I was like, oh my god, that's the Egyptian marriage scarab also. So there's literally two. The Egyptian marriage scarab represents rebirth, renewal, resurrection, creation, and coming into being. It's literally everything that the marriage, the sacred union, the sacred hydros gamos, the holy marriage, the holy matrimony is all about. So it's depicting the union of opposites, the resurrection, the coming into being, and the creation through the sexual communion by the marriage of the two aspects of the diencephalon, of the two thalamic nuclei, which literally are married together as one, where at the top of the most pinnacle, the most high of the holy mountain, the most high of Jacob's ladder, at the very top of your spinal column is where the sacred marriage takes place, on top of the mountain with garlands of fresh herbs.
And there's going to be flutes playing and trombones and flowers and garlands of fresh herbs.
And so that's where the sacred marriage takes place, is at the top of the mountain. And so that's what the marriage scarab is here representing, literally. But then the entire diencephalon itself also represents the scarabaeus, literally as the connection here of the two thalamic nuclei, each representing the spread wings taking flight of the scarabaeus. Just as we see here. And this isn't actually a human brain. I think it might be like a mouse brain. No, it's probably too big. I think it was a sheep brain. I forget exactly where I sourced it from, but it's exactly identical to, again, the Egyptians' correlation and correspondence to the Egyptian scarabaeus. This is actually someone's tattoo right on the back of their head, and it's literally located right at the location where the thalamus is, if you were looking x-ray through the back of the head. So I thought that was incredibly, and I was like, oh my god, if only this person if only this person knew what I know and what I'm going to be showing here, and especially in the full presentation once it really drops. But so this is another ancient Egyptian hieroglyph of the scarabaeus with the spread wings taking flight. So but the spread wings are exactly representative of the coronal sections of the coronal spread of the neocortex. And so again, you have the exact correspondence, the exact anatomical homologous representation of the thalamus lying at the very center, just beneath the corpus callosum, at the very center of the spread wings, just exactly where the thalamic nuclei resides. And so another interesting thing is that if you flip the scarabaeus upside down, like for example, like in this image here where the brain is actually flipped upside down, this is the cerebellum of the brain. And again, this isn't a human brain here, so it's not exactly identical, but with the same concept, if you flip the scarabaeus upside down to where this part, it directly corresponds with the cerebellum. So you have the two hemispheres of the brain at large, the two hemispheres, with the cerebellum lying at the back of the brain just underneath it. So if you take this image here and you flip the scarabaeus upside down to match this one here, if you flip it upside down, you have the cerebellum being corresponding to the thorax of the scarabaeus, and then you have the wings the two main segments of the wings corresponding to the two hemispheres of the brain. So it goes so much deeper, and there's so much more to add into here, but I'm just skimming and just briefly covering this, and we will go so much deeper in the future Symbols of Power film series, and just in this presentation alone. But again, it's absolutely astounding. It's absolutely stunning and just completely mind-blowing, especially when I tie in all the other whole story that this tells. Everything about the Christ, about Osiris, about the resurrection, about the death and rebirth, and the path of the sun, and the correspondence in astrotheology too. There's so much more to it, especially how it relates to my ex-partner's Christie's experience in the hospital with brain metastatic with breast cancer metastases to her brain, and they wanted to put her on the anti-seizure drug called Keppra, which is, so I will get so much deeper into that symbolism. I wanted to make a specific video just about it, including all of this, because it's all my research that I've already done. But they have an antispasmodic pharmaceutical drug called Keppra that basically it completely screws up your mental and emotional abilities, and supposed to prevent seizures, but it actually may likely even induce seizures, and it's actually, it causes severe depression and anger and mood swings, and it's just a very, very bad drug. And it's directly related to their symbolism of Keppra, of the Egyptian Scarabaeus, the scarab-headed god. But we'll get so much deeper into that in future presentations.
And so it's important for us to recognize, for the initiate to realize that when we're observing waves, whether transverse or longitudinal or otherwise, what we're seeing are not actually two-dimensional forms. What we're looking at is actually a two-dimensional orthogonal projection of a three-dimensional form, meaning that is actually all these waves are actually spherical in nature. There are no flat or straight line waves. Everything is spherical in nature. And this goes back to the initial cosmology of Walter Russell, of the cubic spheres of space, but we're not going to get into that in this video whatsoever. We can't. We don't have the depth or the time for that. But so what this means in layman's terms is that in a two-dimensional orthogonal projection of a three-dimensional form means that it's basically projecting a shadow two-dimensionally onto a surface. So what we're seeing again is basically it's only a cross-sectional image of a three-dimensional form, because obviously all forms in space are three-dimensional.
Orthographic projection is going to really help us see shapes that aren't there, and also it's going to help us detail our measurements in a way that's a lot more legible than if we were just to do it off here, which I will teach you that. I haven't yet. So the first thing that we're going to be doing for this assignment is pretty straightforward, is you've got a top, front, and right side. Okay, so the top thing, if you're looking straight down on your object. Front, if you're looking at kind of over here from the left. The right, if you're looking over here from the right side.
And so we're seeing just a cross section, a cross image scan of the human brain. And so this is it's a two-dimensional projection of a three-dimensional shape. And so that's what we mean by an orthographic projection, an orthogonal projection of a three-dimensional form, which is the three-dimensional form comes from Lissajous curves. And so this is what creates this analemma, or this lemniscus is from the Lissajous curve, which is actually a toroidal dynamic, which is actually a dual toroidal dynamic. As we're showing here, is this universal form, this universal structure. Is literally, it's all Lissajous curves, and there's a specific sound frequency. I'm not too great with music or math, so I'm not sure what specific sound frequency creates this biratio Lissajous curve. But I believe it's one of the more simple iterations of the Lissajous curve. I think it's a 2/3 harmonic is what I think it is. Which is that the perfect fifth? I'm not sure. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and go ahead and add that information if you are someone who knows exactly what that is. But yeah, feel free and fill in that puzzle for me, or fill in that piece of the puzzle for me if you have it. Which sound actually creates this Lissajous curve here? But I believe, if I'm not wrong, I think it was 2/3 harmonic. I can't remember.
Of the genetic chromosome. It's the same force that literally, we will go much deeper into this in future Symbols of Power series about navigating the maze once again, and some of the other separate ones as well. So we will cover these pieces much deeper. And I mean, we find this in everything from joints of the bones all the way to, the Southern Crab Nebula, for example, and several other nebulae structures as well. So it is a universal pattern. It is a universal force, a universal form of
of cosmology and of morphology. And so the plasma Z pinch, also known as a zeta pinch, is important for plasma electromagnetic mechanism for the electric universe theory, as well as for standard plasma cosmology in science. Of the optic nerve. And so this is why we can measure the divine proportion from the top of the skull to the pineal gland, and then from the pineal gland directly to towards the posterior of the skull. And we also get the golden divine proportion measuring from the top of the skull to the olfactory bulb, and then from the olfactory bulb to the pineal gland. And of course we also get it when measuring from the top of the skull to the pituitary gland, and from the pituitary gland to the base of the skull, to the back of the skull. We also get the divine proportion measuring width-wise when we measure from the lateral edges of the skull into the internal curvature of the sphenoid bone, directly where the optic nerves pass through the foramina. So directly at those points of the inferior cranial fossa, or the cranial floor, are these contours where the lower cerebrum hits, and they are directly corresponding to the divine proportion measurements. When you measure each one, as the divine proportion has an invisible little line that can be extended, vector can be extended here, and so those 2 points correspond directly with the structure of the inferior cranial fossa. And then of course it can also be measured from, yet again, the pituitary, which hangs directly off the infundibulum, which hangs down directly above the hypothalamus region. So the pituitary measures from the pituitary to the pineal, from the pineal to the back of the skull. And so I also realized that the same standing harmonic wave of this of the phi ratio, the golden mean harmonic wave, that composes so below the belt in the perineal muscles of the female, is a direct above the belt correspondence of the exact golden ratio standing harmonic wave of the optic relay pathways of the optic nerves, which are literally some of the most active and highly lit up neural pathways when viewed from a diffusion tensor imaging scan. And of course, again, the pituitary and the pineal gland are at the exact golden mean proportion, the divine proportion, which the entire human skull and the entire human brain is entirely composed of nothing but the divine proportion at every single structure. And that's also where, Anton LaVey steals his symbolism for the Leviathan, or for, this popular symbolism in Anton LaVey's Satanism, which that's not at all what it is or where it comes from. It's literally the immortal coil of the human body. Literally, you're sitting full lotus, your legs are crossed in the lemniscate because you are literally creating that coil at the base of the spine. But so the coiled serpent that lies at the base of the spine is literally the coiled spring, which is Kundal, is ancient Sanskrit, Kundal.
meaning coiled serpent, or kundali, which is where we get kundalini from, the coiled serpent that rises up the spinal central nervous system,
which is where Tesla derived his universal physics design of free energy and free electricity as the Tesla coil. Because the Tesla coil is designed after the human physiology itself, the immortal coil, which stores electrical potential in that coiled nature. A coil is literally, it is a potential energy, meaning that it is energy stored and preserved within itself, just waiting to be unleashed, waiting to be the full potential to explode from that coil. That's what the human physiology literally is. That's why you get tense, you get anxious, you get all these emotions, because that energy is stored within you and it's built up, and it is potential energy that will eventually be released and become kinetic energy when it is expelled, when it is released at its full potential.
And remember when I showed you a demonstration a few days ago of the fact, now we're looking at the plane of inertia along this magnet, which is right down the center. It's not located there, but it is a pressure field mediation, which you can't cut it out. You can never cut out North Pole or South Pole. I explained this in great detail a few days ago. Okay, it's a plane of inertia. What happens is, over a greater spatial difference, the pressure mediation, and this is a string, this is too long for the dielectric inertia plane to sit at the center. If I take 2 or 3 magnets, let me take off 2 of them here and put them down. Okay? If I just take 2 of these, the plane of inertia will sit right there in the middle. You can see it, right? Well, that's all well and fine. But with too great of a spatial distance, let's just say this is a longitudinal transmission here. This is really long. The plane of inertia can't sit at the middle here because there is too much spatial phase between this end and this end. So it cannot exist as a plane of inertia. Mother Nature works by simplex pressure mediation. So how does Mother Nature distribute, and I talked about this the other day, distribute the plane of inertia when the plane of inertia is too huge, i.e. a longitudinal transmission like this? As I showed you, if you're able to look up close, and you can buy a set of these if you want, these are just like 2mm cube neodymium iron borons. It distributes itself in a double helix and a vortex, exactly like, except this time it is inverse to light. Now the circuit of light, listen closely here. You better damn pay attention closely here, okay? In regular light is a coaxial circuit. We have transverse electrical and magnetic and a longitudinal plane of dielectric pulses. Actually, excuse me, the pulses are right here, where the electrical and magnetic are at their null point, okay? And with increasing frequency, like blue light, towards the blue end of the spectrum, we have more pulses, which is why we have, this is also the explanation for the photoelectric effect, which Einstein won a Nobel Prize for, but he made correct observations but incorrect conclusions. This is why we have more units of power on, like, say, blue light, okay, as opposed to red light. We could say this is red light and this is blue light. Okay, well, that's fine. We have transverse electrical and magnetic field perturbations resultant to the longitudinal dielectric pulses which exist here. The longitudinal, this is a coaxial circuit. You know what a coax cable looks like, right? You know, it has an outer sheathing of copper and a central conductor core. Coaxial circuit. Light is a coaxial circuit. We have electrical and magnetic transverse, okay? And we have longitudinal dielectric pulses, which occur here. Okay, now these are the power. By the way, this little thing right here is what the idiots of quantum mechanics and general relativity called das Lichtwand, or what the common idiot calls a photon. There's no such damn BS as a photon. It doesn't exist. It is a misunderstanding of a dielectric pulse, okay? Misunderstanding, big time misunderstanding. So, what does this have to do with high power? Not just power transmission wirelessly, we can do that. But high power, high directionality, non-lossy, meaning it's not, you spray out a water hose, water goes left, right, goes all over the damn place, right? A lot of it, you shoot out 100% of it, but only 10% of it reaches the target at the end, right? Okay, lossy. Some people are like, what are you talking about when you mean lossy? It means you shoot out 100%, but only 10% reaches your target. what we have here is, by creating a helicoil of the plane of inertia around an electrical longitudinal pulse perturbation, and I'm in direct contact with the person that I've seen demonstrate. They're not on YouTube, sorry, no. Now when you're seeking a patent and you made a huge discovery, you're not going to post videos on YouTube. You have a longitudinal electric. So now, at every transverse, we have the dielectric in a double helix, or the plane of inertia, that is corkscrewing around a pulse perturbation. And so what we're able to have is the holy grail of all humanity, that which, let me make a point here, the holy grail of what everybody's been scoffing at Nikola Tesla. Oh, that's not possible. No, that's not possible. The holy grail of what Nikola Tesla said was possible. And we said, no, it's not possible. Well, it is possible. Longitudinal wireless high voltage transmission. Here's the real holy grail in actuality. At least this is what my buddy calls it. Wireless high voltage transmission.
So that's what the human body is. That's what the coil, what the symbolism actually is. And I'm sure, I don't think that, Sasha or, New Earth Nation actually knows, this depth as to what that symbolism is, because this is my own original pieces that I will be presenting in my future films and what I'm writing in the book right now. And so of course the lemniscus is also the literal form. It's a band. Lemniscus means a ribbon or a band, which is literally where we get the physics and mathematical term of the Mobius strip. A ribbon or a band with the half twist and reattached at the ends, to the point to where it's just a single path that occupies both sides of the ribbon. And I don't really understand what the significance, it really sort of doesn't mean anything, and don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really see any practicality or any application to it whatsoever, as I'm revealing. But again, so that's the lemniscate, that is literally the human body, and of course the spinal column with the pineal gland topped at the center, or topped at the apex. And also in this, what I'm writing for the book, it goes so much deeper into so much deeper into the symbolism of the pine cone itself, the etymology of the pine, of the pinus longeva. The pine cone itself is literally the etymology. The pin literally means the head, and the pin means the head, and which is why it's the pinnacle. It's the pin. It is the head of the pin. In other words, the top of the pin, and which is why we get a penis is literally a pen 15, which was always our secret password in elementary school. It's a penis, it's a pinus, comes from the etymology of Latin pinus, which is where the Pinus longeva is literally the longest living type of pine on planet Earth. And I mean, I can't even begin to summarize it, just off the top of my head. It goes so incredibly deep. I've literally got entire chapters written for this book, just dedicated to the etymology of the pine cone and the pineal gland itself, but in so many ways. So again, it's my original discovery of as above, so below the belt, how the pine cone is literally not just etymologically, linguistically, but symbolically and homologously, anatomically represented as is identically correspondent with the penile glands, the penis head. The pineal gland is etymologically homologously correspondent to the penile glands, pineal gland, penile glands. And I can't even begin to summarize this. It gets so deep. So if I try to verbalize it, just through words alone, it will, it goes so deep. And I'm not going to make this like a 6-hour long film. We're not going to do that. I can't. I don't have the time, the energy. We will never get done here. So, all right. So let's crack it on open here, boy. I'm going in. So this is just another piece that I'm literally adding on to what we covered in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3 regarding as above, so below the belt, where I covered how the thalamus is literally exactly homologously correspondent with, again, the penis head, or the pineal glands, as well as the pineal gland directly homologously corresponded to the pineal glands. And so this is just another depiction of that. And this is probably going to get my my video completely demonetized, or probably violating community guidelines or something, because YouTube algorithms probably can't tell the difference between the pineal gland and a dude spreading his ass. But no, this isn't actually a dude spreading his ass. It's actually it's the diencephalon, and that what we're looking at is literally the pineal gland. And I posted this on Facebook. I was like, pop quiz, who can guess what I'm showing you here? And everybody was guessing like just far from the truth. And so I just kept going, nope, try again, nope. Nobody ever even got close. And I was like, and I even hinted, I was like, it's everything we covered in as above, so below the belt in Part 2, and just going so much deeper, and nobody could understand. So I was like, all right, well, yeah, I mean, but so it's homologously, it's exactly fractal. It's the dude spreading his ass. I don't even know if I will go through the symbolism to show. No! But so this is the very symbolism of conscious illumination, of enlightenment, of the journey of esoteric knowledge and embodiment of God consciousness, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, infinite universal awareness, universal intelligence, embodied in the human form. And that's literally the entire epitome of Freemasonry, of Esoterica, of Rosicrucianism, of the Rosicrucian, and all of these things is the very essence of the esoteric human anatomy, the human physiology, which itself is a microcosmic representation of what the entire universe represents and is doing as a whole. Each one of us is a small fractal representation of what the entire universe itself is actually doing. It's the same physics all the way down, you know, no matter what scale you are focusing on, you know, in universal awareness, whether you're focusing on galactic scale, on the universal scale, or on the microscopic scale. It's the same set of physics, same laws of universal physics that applies at all scales and at all orders of magnitude, all the way down and all the way up, infinitely. It is infinite fractality, and that's what the human body represents.
It's very Masonic. I mean, you'll catch the Eye of Providence, you'll catch pyramids, you'll catch everything. You'll see it.
And that's why, you know, I've got my own symbolism. If you guys really like the symbolism artwork, graphic artwork that I've composed, why the Freemasonic square and the compass, I've shown this from so many different aspects. I've shown the entire meaning of what the square and compass actually is. Number one, so you get the compass itself, which draws feminine curves. You get the square, or the rule. So it's rather than a compass, it's actually, in Freemasonry, it's called a divider. It's a divide. So it's the symbolism of the divide and rule. In other words, divide and conquer. But it's not just that. It's so much more universal, and it's not just, you know, dark or evil or any of that stuff. It's not dark or evil at all. It's just a universal concept. It's like any tool. It can be used however you want to use it, for whatever purpose. But it literally comes from the physics of nature, human anatomy, esoteric anatomy, and the physiology itself. As the square, or the compass, is actually depicted at a very esoteric angle of 47 degrees. 47 degrees is an extremely esoteric number. You'll find it everywhere. But so it's 47 plus the 90 degree square, or the 90 degree rule, which equates to the sacred number of 137, which is the golden number, the golden angle of phyllotaxis, which is the Fibonacci spiral, the angle at which plants spiral and they grow stalks at a 137 degree angle from each other, which is literally known as the golden angle. And it's the angle of phyllotaxis that all plants grow in, because it's the divine number of complete division, to where each of these branches will equally attain the maximum amount of sunlight, so they can each attain the maximum amount of growth. and expansion without interfering with each other. So this number 137, and so that's combined what the actual meaning of the square and compass, just one of the layers of the square and compass, what it actually means. We covered so much more in depth in Symbols of Power Part 2 and Part 3. There's so much more in-depth meaning of the square and compass, which is literally the urogenital and the anal triangle combined. So in other words, it's literally the human sexual anatomy. It's literally the pelvis. It's literally the perineal region of the human body, which is the sacral region. It is the sacred sacrum. It is the origin of sexual creation. So again, it is the divine masculine and the divine feminine combining. How am I doing this here? Combining. Sorry, I can't. How does it go? Like this. Combining together and merging together in the sexual perineal union, which creates the universal sexagram. And I've got whole other original pieces that I haven't published anywhere yet that will also be in the book. Complete original discoveries. This is where the two pelvises, where the two, where both of you, where your two pelvis regions are joined together, and so therefore each of your urogenital triangles come together, and they depending on what angle or what position you're having, and it literally creates a sexagram, or also known as a hexagram, but I call it the sexagram because hex is literally sex. Hex is Greek for sex is Latin for, which is Greek hex, which means six, which is why sex literally means six. Six, sex, hex, the sex is the hex, which is the square, which is the cube of creation, the cube of space. And so, I mean, we could go on and on and on with all this stuff, but so that's what, another aspect of what the square and the compass represents. But in this artwork that I've depicted, if you guys like this artwork, it's available, you can check it out in the Lifting the Veil merch store. It's a really cool graphic that I put together, but it's literally the human body sitting in full lotus position. That's what the square and the compass is. It's with the sacred G, which is literally the G spot. It is the spark of creation, which the G literally comes from the spiral, the sacred phi ratio spiral of creation, which creates all physical forms that we observe in this universe, especially in the plants, which is manifested by the pine cone, or in other words, the pine cone topped on top of the fennel staff, or the thyrsus, which is literally the angle of phyllotaxis. So, oh my God, it's a Freemasonic conspiracy. Oops, I didn't realize that there's a thyrsus here on the wall in the wine artwork behind me. Oh my God, I must be a shill. Oh my, that's literally what, so that's what it all means. That's what it all comes from. And I'm sorry I didn't want to make this too long. I wanted to make this a short video, but like as always, you cannot scathe the surface of this stuff. And as always, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch my videos. If you enjoy this information, please share it around with anyone who you think might also appreciate the information.
It's my greatest passion, and my purpose and my mission is to continue to produce genuinely inspired and meaningful, uplifting content, intellectual pieces of art.
We haven't even begun to scratch the surface of just how much info is ready and waiting to be produced. I can't even keep up with the amount of output, or let alone the amount of writing that is coming through. We haven't even gotten started yet. We are just warming up.
And so we just need to take care of this business, guys. If I can meet my second minimum goal, I will never have to ask or beg for funding ever again. So I want to get to that point where I never have to ask you ever again, because I hate doing it, honestly. I really do. So I hope I never have to ask again by reaching these minimum goals. Because as it stands right now, I am not able to do this full time. I simply am not making enough to pay off the amount of effort that goes into these. So I can't practically do it right now. So we have to meet these minimum goals. Otherwise, I can't do this.
Please help me continue in this mission.
And check out the merch in the links below. Help support my channel that way, or support my channel on patreon.com/liftingtheveil. Links in the description below. And I will see you guys in the next video. So there is so much more content coming up. First in the lineup is this 6-hour film that I'm going to divide up about the New World Order agenda and the truth about veganism. It will be a part 2 of my other viral film that went out, so The Truth About Veganism. So stay tuned for that next. It's almost finished. I'm just polishing up. I want to make sure I cover all the details, so it's very in-depth, and that way there's no confusion to leave you hanging. So look for that next.